Reality TV show idea. From private jets to paycheck to paycheck. Can a billionaire survive on their worker's salary for a month? I doubt a month is enough to really feel the effect. That and a camera team just changes everything. I won't trust doing business with a random nobody, but a guy in a suit with a whole production team following him? That's just a different story. That's why reality shows are intrinsically just that. Shows. I think it would be better if they had to live with their lowest salaried employee for a month or two, in my opinion. In their house, dinner with the family, travel to and from work together, same lunch, kids with homework, the works. Building that relation would, in my opinion, do much more for this problem than just experiencing below your normal standard of living before returning to it. You're much more likely to feel empathy for a family you know, and much less likely to forget them. Anything else would just be another show about wealthy people having a fun adventure to talk about at cocktail parties. This would just end up incredibly self-serving and boring. They'd never truly experience what it's like to be in the precarious position of a minimum wage employee living hand to mouth, and the novelty is just salt in the wound. It would be more interesting to see the reverse. Isn't this almost exactly the same premise as Secret Millionaire? Do you guys even have that in the US? I guess it's a slightly different premise though, as the question here is for the salary to be what the person pays their employees, to encourage some awareness of their livelihood, I guess, rather than the minimum wage of the country. Sure, I'd watch it. They'd never do it though, because then they'd have to admit that they don't pay a living wage. Disagree actually. All they have to do is stick it out for a month, and then they can say from personal experience that it isn't that bad. Of course, they never have to deal with the effects of living that way in the long term. It's kind of like when privileged college students pretend to be homeless by camping out on the quad for a night. Oh, they wouldn't have any trouble. Most of them are self-made, and most have a large number of financial skills that 99% of people don't. They'd micro their finances and come out better off than most people. You think someone like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, or Elon Musk couldn't handle it? What about Warren Buffett? The guy is already living a modest life. A lot of idiots in the comments seem to fail to realize that a lot of these billionaires were already in a super crappy position before, and they pulled themselves out of it. These people run massive corporations and charities, and you idiots seriously think that living your life for a few months would be a challenge to them? That's some cringe. I think you're a little bit blue-pilled on some of these people's self-made man narratives there, man. While there's certainly a level of hardship that some pioneers of industry had to endure, all of the success stories you've mentioned here were solidly middle class at the poorest, and most of them started their ventures in the 80s or 90s at latest, when rent and property values were just more affordable for a startup. Their modern-day counterparts have a much higher barrier to entry. And to go back to them being middle class at worst, being a young recent graduate with an idea, time, and a dream ahead of you, and at least like a bed in your family home to fall back on, is a far cry from being modern poor, from a family who might even rely on your income, and unable to sink months or even years into kind of making your business run. I think it's certainly possible to have a rags to riches story from any background, at least in a first world country, but I think it's harder than it used to be. There was actually a similarly themed show in Hong Kong and mainland China years ago. They swapped billionaires with bottom feeders and let the rich do the basic jobs on the lowest salary to see how far the rich could go purely by their own effort. Nearly all of the billionaires admitted that they couldn't make it anywhere regardless of how hard they worked. Even working without sleeping and resting couldn't give you any accumulation to help you climb up to the higher level of society. There was only despair and admission that the divide between poor and rich was already a deep valley, and mere personal effort made little sense. It stirred a big debate among the society back then, and I think that was part of the reason the show got cancelled. There was also another show in China, swapping senior political figures with community-level council workers to see how good they could do in each other's posts. The mayors were flooded by the angry mobs who kept asking for more and more benefits that were impossible to fulfill, and by the end they had to admit that the amount of work at basic community level was just too much to achieve anywhere. The show also got cancelled quite soon after a few episodes. There was a UK show where celebs lived with benefit claimants for a week, only a few episodes. One was Boris Johnson's sister, the journalist. I remember she criticised the woman for smoking bootleg cigarettes on £70 a week. What a waste of money, yada yada. And at the end she said there was no wonder she smoked, life was so hard and miserable, and she'd smoke as well in that situation. People kept petitioning for the likes of Ian Duncan Smith to live on £70 and see how far he gets. Still think that's a pretty good idea for all MPs who affect policy. I'll be a contrarian here and say that I bet they'd be able to thrive. Usually the CEO of a company got to that position because they're an uber-talented human, obvious exceptions excluded. I think a CEO would be able to manage their resources effectively and make it work. I know this is hard to fathom for the internet stupid hate train for the rich, but most of them were smarter and worked harder than you when they were younger, which is why they're in a place that they're in now, and you're not. So I imagine they'll manage just fine. There are a lot of careers that require some insane levels of hard work and intelligence that don't pay six figures. Some do and some don't. I just think that's worth mentioning. If they did it for 3 months minimum, I'd watch it, with problem scenarios thrown in. Broken down car, tube strike, dodgy boiler, sick child. I think the wheels would come off pretty quickly. Don't forget the pay rent or buy food dilemma scenario. Solved that one years ago. Just buy ramen noodles and eat 2 packs of that every day until you're caught up back on rent. Easy peasy. Don't forget to at least chuck in a handful of frozen or tinned vegetables, an egg, and a bit of soy sauce to convince yourself that it's a proper meal. And triple the cost? Ha, no, it's about efficiency. At least add the egg. Eggs are cheap as frick. You can get like a dozen for $1.25, which comes out to about 10 cents each. This was written in 2019 and has aged wonderfully. I love reality shows, so I'd watch it depending on who produced it. If it's too fake with too many emotional moments, advertising and people shouting, I'm out. I freaking hate that emotional moment bullcrap. Kitchen Nightmares and Bar Rescue used to be great. Now I can't even watch them. Same with Undercover Boss. Oh, it's more than just the money. It's the lack of security these people endure. Not knowing if you'll lose your job tomorrow and have no savings. Being kicked out of your home. An unexpected bill you can't afford which may lead to increasing debt. Putting these rich people in a poor lifestyle for a month isn't enough. Even if they lost their money and homes, they'll have such a huge network that they'll be back on their feet in the time it takes for us peons to earn enough to eat for a week. They could never really understand what it's like to be poor or ever face that reality again. So, what would happen? It'd be a completely self-serving advert about how, now I realize that we need to do more for our employees. The workers get a small vanity bonus, probably give an immigrant worker with limited English a car, they'll pat themselves on the back, and then 2 weeks later, they've forgotten about the show and they'll go back to their old ways. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend The Act of Killing. It's a documentary following an elderly man who was once a member of a government-sanctioned anti-communist death squad in Indonesia. Now the commies are defeated, he's celebrated in his own country. There's a scene where they had him do a mock-up of a torture and execution method he'd used. He asked production to hold because he found it traumatic. In a very raw moment, he asks the question, "Is this what my victims were feeling in their last moments?" The producer responds, "No, what your victims was feeling was much worse because you were able to ask us to stop, and they knew there was no escape." You can see in a couple of seconds it changes the guy's whole worldview. And the depressing part is that he's the only one to have any sort of realization like that. The other guys had no such realization, or maybe they had one years ago and didn't care. I would imagine a billionaire who's been rich for most or all of their adult life equally would have trouble conceiving of the dread of inescapable poverty. I'd do more than a month and without any contact to rich buddies either. If it's a month, I think a lot would just buy rice and beans every day and go, "See? It's super easy to be poor. You just need to make better economical choices. I've proven myself right." Longer than that, and they'll have to really get used to how their lowest paid employees live. Would they learn a lesson? Maybe? Likely not. They'd still have a mansion to come back to at the end of it. They'll give their lowest paid people a one-time bonus, or maybe they'll drag one out in front of the cameras to give them a fancy car, so their own reputation gets better. And then they won't change anything else. Rice and beans, huh? Wish I'd thought about that sort of meal when I was a poor student. I'd just likely have the mercury poison of eating tinned tuna every day for 2 years. But yeah, I think a lot of these TV situations are a bit too controlled, and the people who run TV networks would have no reason to want to run a show that would put ideas like wealth inequality in people's heads. Frankly, I'm amazed that Chinese one we heard about earlier existed. A lot of rich people voluntarily go on vacation to third world countries. The catch is they know they'll have a way out and an end date. I'd be interested to watch a show where their CEO had to be personally financially responsible for the welfare of 50% of their lowest paid employees for 10 years, and their net growth percentage equaled their bonus every year, with a big bonus if both the company and the employees were profitable at the end. The weird thing is, they would be profitable. You should look up the story of Harris Rosen. He's a guy who started up growing up poor on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and became wealthy in the Florida hotel business. He decided to shepherd part of his fortune into a troubled community with the melodious-sounding name of Tangelo Park. A quick snap from the city's tourist engine, this neighborhood of small, once charming houses seemed a world away from the theme park pleasures as its leaders tried to beat back substances, crime, and too many shuttered homes. Nearly half of its students had dropped out of school. 21 years later, with an infusion of 11 million of Mr. Rosen's money so far, and Tangelo Park is a striking success story. Nearly all of its seniors graduate from high school, and most go on to college on full scholarships that Mr. Rosen has financed. Young children head for kindergarten primed for learning, or already reading, because of the free daycare centers and pre-kindergarten program that Mr. Rosen provides. Property values have climbed, houses and lawns, with a few exceptions, are welcoming. Crime has plummeted. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I think it's a very common mistake of well-meaning, generous people to assume that people who do bad things must not realize what they're doing, because it's hard to imagine someone being a deliberately crappy person when the idea of that repulses you. The idea of, if the super rich only understood what it's like to be poor, they'd give people more than slave wages. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care. There's nothing for them to learn from this. A month isn't long enough because no rent is due and stuff. A year would be more fitting. You should watch Undercover Billionaire on Discovery, not to be confused with Undercover Boss. Billionaire Glenn Stearns moves to Erie, Pennsylvania with just $100, a truck, and no contacts, and has to make a company valued at $1 million in 90 days. He also can't mention who he is to anyone. It's pretty much exactly like you're describing, and it's insanely entertaining. Okay, Googling "is Undercover Billionaire legit?" brings up old Reddit threads about it where people said Twitter kind of exposed it, because everyone in the city knew something was going on. So every time Glenn went on to get a loan, a job, or even people who literally worked for free and donated time to help for free, they only supposedly did it because they'd seen cameras or they knew it had to be connected to the stir in town. I did enjoy the show regardless, and what was leaked about it didn't really discredit it entirely. But yeah, the tires he picked up and sold at the beginning of the show were supposedly planted there, and a few other things, but not everything was debunked or discredited, so it still had some good lessons. No, slumming is not living your entire life in a slum. Here's what would happen. Fake billionaires like Trump will come to this show, and real billionaires probably won't. Those who appear on the show will brag about how they're self-made and their employees could make do with even less. And we'll find out, like that TV show Naked and Afraid, that outside of the camera, these billionaires were living in their luxury RVs, sipping martinis, and having affairs. There was that episode of American Dad where they tried to live on minimum wage for a month. It was fantastic. Stan ended up an addict in like 3 days. They're just treated as a novelty since they know they'll be getting their billions back at the end of the month. They wouldn't have to truly live like a person who lives hand to mouth every day of their lives. They wouldn't really learn anything from it. In fact, they'd probably look back on it and laugh. Remember when we had to eat that can of ravioli? They'd treat it like going on safari, I think. I think they'd have to agree to swap everything down to the last detail. Apartment, car, if they even have one, wardrobe, food, and hobbies. And it would have to be ongoing, not just a couple of months. The real question is how to get a CEO to agree to it. They'd also have to be allowed to make different decisions on the starting conditions. You're not proving anything by dropping a CEO in the position of a minimum wage worker who's underwater on their car payments and behind on rent and watching them struggle. If the CEO would have chosen a different car and a smaller apartment, for example. Only if they also put a low-level employee in the CEO's position to highlight that it's not all golf games and getting other people to do your work. Depends if he's self-made or not. Self-made rich people often know very well what it means to be poor, and that's why they worked so hard not to be. Some extremely wealthy people live very humbly, and many started from the bottom as a lowest-level employee themselves, barely scraping by. No, I hate all reality TV that doesn't feature Gordon Ramsay. I support raising the minimum wage, and the concept definitely resonates with me, but the show concept is not going to be life-changing for anyone involved. I'll brace for people hating me for saying this, but I don't understand why we fault people for making a lot of money, as long as they do it honestly. The dark secret of any executive, athlete, artist, or actor who makes an exceptional amount of money is that this is what the market will pay them. The CEO of company X or Z likely has a skill set that's very useful for planning corporate strategy that few people have and that takes decades to develop, like understanding finance, the ability to read market trends, skill negotiating partnerships and labor agreements. If they're good at this, the company and its shareholders, if they're publicly traded, will also benefit. So this is in many ways an investment. As for the workers who earn less, we should raise the minimum wage, but they too are free to seek employment elsewhere if someone will pay them more money. It doesn't make sense getting angry at market dynamics. If any company were to apply a policy overnight that we're going to pay our CEO the same as our assembly line workers, you would likely see that company go bankrupt soon, as because the only people willing to do that job at that price probably don't have the experience to do it wisely. All the qualified candidates took jobs at your competitors' factories where they were offered more. The same is true for basketball or any other sport. People pay you money because they believe you'll make them money. Right? People are expecting these very smart people to suffer and do poorly, when really this would be a show about which person can climb the ladder the fastest. I doubt these people will struggle that badly. It's like everyone assumes a CEO is a person born into wealth that lounges around all day doing nothing. I'd bet most people would be crushed under their workload. Hey folks, Looney Left Narrator here again, and while I agree that, again, some of these people are very smart and capable and find success by being so, I disagree again with the premise that being a CEO inherently makes someone very intelligent. So many of them either have the time and cushion to make their businesses work or find a good starting job, or they're very lucky, or all of these. And the idea that they can just look for better jobs because they know their worth kind of acknowledges that they've had a life start and education that very few of their employees would have had access to. What would happen is that either the show would be faked or no CEO would ever agree to it. I think they'd get along just fine. It'd probably be a bit of a lifestyle adjustment for that month, but not something they'd be incapable of. They themselves have, in all likelihood, lived that lifestyle as they were coming up, maybe while in college or fresh out of it. Very few CEOs just waltz into the role without first having come up from the lower ranks. Almost no CEOs are billionaires, and you guys live in this fantasy world where they're evil people that are out to get you. Actually, they're just the people in the world most skilled at managing huge companies, as if you expect there to not be head of companies. They can be and are often fired, and they typically answer to their shareholders that own the company. The internet pretending that every time minimum wage increases, food and rent price doesn't increase to screw us in the rear even more. This has already been a movie in the 80s, Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Of course, it's fiction and played for comedic effect, but I think if you strip away the laughs, it probably wouldn't be too far from the truth. Gwyneth Paltrow did what she called a food stamp challenge a few years back to prove that you could eat healthily on just that much for a month. I think it took her less than a week to give up. There was a politician here several years ago who retired from office, and they had to retire on a meager $65,000 per annum salary. They couldn't do it, so they chose not to be alive anymore instead. It would be turned into an emotionally manipulative show about the struggles of the common worker, where at the end of the episode, the one worker would get some extravagant gift or a raise, the CEO would be painted as some sort of hero to the people, all while they continue to pay 90% of their employees just above poverty wages. You should read the book Nickel and Dimed, Making It in America. It's old now, but the point still stands. An upper-class, six-figure writer tried to survive in a minimum wage job for a year. Spoiler, she needs multiple jobs and her life is miserable. But she does make it. A better reality show examined the lives of people over the age of 22 who are still stuck in minimum wage jobs. Look at the circumstances, the poor decisions they made, their levels of motivation, their work ethic and ambition. See where they came from and how they grew up. That way we can all learn valuable life lessons. I saw it. I went to private military school. Most billionaires hack it just fine. You want to see something hysterical though? Saudis. Take a Saudi's assets away. That's some primetime material right there. Since they'd be on minimum wage, does that mean they'd be allowed to live with parents rent-free while they attend public schools for free, with the only expenses they have to worry about being a weekend out with their friends? I wouldn't watch this because I'm not an angry socialist. I'm a capitalist. But I'd like to watch one of 100 documentaries where a guy has a good idea, works 18 hours a day for a decade while everyone else is getting safe jobs, goes $100 million in debt, hires an awesome creative team, turns it into something world-changing, and then all you infantile morons have to acknowledge becoming a billionaire is hard as F, and they usually deserve their money. If you'd like the titles to those documentaries, open your refrigerator, look in your garage, or check the name of the device you're reading this on. However, the germ of your premise I agree with. People should be paid a fair wage. Stop stroking yourselves to the idea of a billionaire with a flat tire. I find no enjoyment at the idea of you trying to make your own baby food with a hand masher, or using whale oil to read from the Bible for 1 hour per night. Billionaires created those luxuries for you, and now you pay pennies for them, you filthy, miserable, spoiled idiots. Also, screw Trump, he never contributed a frickin' thing to our society, except turmoil, so don't paint me with that brush. I'd watch. Some, I think, would make it just fine. Some would crap out immediately. Most would struggle along somewhere in the middle. You know, almost as if they were just people. I think the only thing that would happen is that the CEO would use that to convince themselves they're a selfless person willing to put themselves in their workers' shoes and then just go back to their multi-million-dollar mansion. We have a show like that. Rich people and poor people switch places for a week or so. Usually, the rich people don't like it, but they become creative with what to do with their time, that it's free, and in the end they're all right. The poor people go nuts and become crying with tears happy with stuff like ordering pizzas. Usually, the rich gift the poor something as well, like a new bike or a subscription to an amusement park or a sporting activity. Okay, so there's been some division between people and their answers here, but I think we'd all like to see members of Congress and the Senate do this. 1 month at minimum wage in their state. I'd watch the hell out of that.
What's the saddest thing to hear "it's okay, I'm used to it" as a response to? Had a friend who was really lonely and his old friends were awful to him. Like, there was this one girl who would just hit him and stuff and emotionally abuse him really bad. But he didn't have any other friends, so he just stuck with it. Accidentally hit him lightly or something when he said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." And I felt so bad for the poor guy. He's fine now though. My son talking about how his mother, my ex-wife, talks to him. During our marriage, she would take everything out on me, whether it was my fault or not. Too busy at work? Shout at me. Her family's coming to visit? Shout at me. Now we're apart, and she does the same thing to him. He moves between both houses by his own choice. Last week, she told him, "You might as well leave." As you would imagine, he was very upset. When he got to my place, he was making excuses for her and actually said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I've never spoken badly about his mother to any of my children until now. I've been talking to him since then that she used to do this to me and that it's actually not okay. He spent a lot of time considering what I've been saying. He's 20 and has said that he's going to have a discussion with her about it. I hope she acts like as much of an adult as he is, but I don't like the chances of that. The one time a girl ever asked me out in my life, back in high school, I told her, "Sorry, I just met a girl I really like and we're starting to get serious, so I can't right now." And her answer to that was, "It's okay, I'm used to it. No one ever picks me first." Or something like that. I felt absolutely terrible, because usually back then, that would have been my line. Preface, my boyfriend has lost his mom, both of his uncles, and his step-grandfather, all separate instances. Literally last Sunday night at midnight, my boyfriend woke me up to tell me that one of his really good friends from high school died. He was so upset and I was so sad for him. I told him how sorry I was for him because I honestly didn't even know what to say. His response? "It's okay, I'm used to it." In the saddest tone I've ever heard. I started crying. How freaking heartbreaking. When you're volunteering at the homeless shelter and they have to turn someone out on a cold winter night because the facility is maxed out, the person with tears says, "It's okay, I'm used to it." Oh, guys, this is going to be a rough one to get through. I had a roommate after college that unfortunately slipped back into a pill problem. I came back to the apartment one evening with my mom to find my roommate passed out on the floor and incoherent. I was freaking out the entire time, but my mom was incredibly calm and knew exactly what to do. Afterwards, she told me, "I used to have to do that all the time with my dad." My mom grew up with an alcoholic father who ended up dying of his disease, so she had been through a lot. But I really had no idea how bad it had been for her until then. I still get a little choked up thinking about her face in that moment. This won't be a very popular opinion unless you've really been through it, but when people constantly interrupt you, especially when it's by people that you love. It's one thing when it's a lively and interesting conversation. Then I get it. But even in just normal everyday communication, after asking so many people to stop with no avail, it gets to the point where you know nobody is really listening or cares what you have to say. I'm almost just tired of talking, but it's okay. I'm used to it. When I was in 10th grade, there was this freshman girl who had a pretty nice body in my photography class. Sometimes when she walked by the back table, like 3 or 4 of the guys there would slap her butt, and she would just keep walking solemnly. One day, I took her aside so no one was in earshot and asked her why she just lets them do that to her. And she said, "It's fine, I've had to deal with it since I was in middle school from them." This one makes me legitimately angry, guys. Anyone out there dealing with this kind of thing? This is absolutely not appropriate under any means. Do not feel that you need to accept this kind of behavior. There's always someone willing to help you in this situation. And if you're the one doing this and think it's funny, shame on you. When my boss told me a few weeks ago that I haven't been getting enough quotes to him and maybe this sales job isn't for me, but you're really a nice guy, I could not tell you how many times I've had someone say something negative followed up with, but you're a really nice guy. Not quite it's okay, I'm used to it, but pretty close. I'll listen to a friend of mine who has ADHD and Asperger's talk about his D&D stories, and he'll go on for a bit and then suddenly stop and say, "Sorry, I'm rambling." And you just know that he's been told to shut up or stop talking so many times now that he's used to having to stop talking because someone got frustrated with him rambling. Makes me sad that someone would tell this guy to shut up when he's clearly enjoying explaining his wild universes. Passion like that shouldn't be stifled. Constantly having different utilities cut off and multiple eviction threats from the landlord, and a large possibility of becoming homeless in the near future because whoever you live with would rather stock up on liquor than save for rent and bills. That seems almost too specific. I was walking into Walmart the other day when I saw a woman in her early 60s in a wheelchair trying to push herself up a hill against the wind with a basket on her lap. I said to her, "Pardon me, I don't mean to be rude, but would you like a hand?" And she said, "Oh no, it's all right, I'm used to it." I felt so guilty for how much I take my legs for granted. What a trooper she was. This kid I had at an after-school program was supposed to be picked up by his dad for the weekend. Basically talked all Friday about how much fun they were going to have. Well, Monday came and I found out the dad never showed. The kid seemed fine though, and when I tried to get if he was really okay, he said, "It's okay, I should be used to this by now." Also another kid I babysit, her mom is supposed to call on Sunday nights but skips many of them and just calls whenever she pleases really, and gets mad at the kid for not answering while in school. I asked her about it and she said it doesn't bother her because she's just so used to her mom being flaky and not calling at the agreed upon time. Why do deadbeat parents like that constantly gas up their kids and then let them down? If you're going to be a disappointment as a father, at least don't get the kids' hopes up when you know you're not going to follow through. My mom has some strong letting go issues since she had a rough childhood that resulted in her not letting me go to birthday parties, sleepovers, playdates, etc. when I was younger because she was afraid something was going to happen or that I would somehow embarrass myself for life. Around the 3rd grade, we had a new kid in class, and when it came around to birthday parties, everyone but me got an invite. The new kid noticed this after a while and was offended for me. When asked why I wasn't upset, I just stated that I was used to it. Even if I had gotten an invite, I would not be allowed to go. 8th grade teacher here. I have a student who recently told me that her mom cries every night as she goes through the week's budget trying to work out how much they can afford to eat that week. I asked her if she ever went hungry because as her teacher, it's my duty to escalate when a child isn't having basic needs met, and whether she wanted to see the school counselor about the crying. Her response to both questions was, "It's okay, I'm used to it." It was honestly the most heartbreaking thing I'd ever heard. Later on, I found out that this girl only had half a buttered sandwich each day at school, which was to last her through recess and lunch, and always went to the library to read during breaks because she wanted to conserve her energy. All the teachers just thought she was a bookworm. In actual fact, she longed for friends but hadn't made any because they were all running around in the playground. We don't get a conclusion to this story, but I really hope the teacher followed through on making sure all the child's needs were met. I used to nanny this really sweet girl. In kindergarten or the 1st grade, the girl that sat next to her in class died in a freak accident. She'd recently, within the year or so, just lost grandparents, animals, and a family friend. I asked her how she was handling the loss of her friend and she responded, "I'm okay, I'm used to losing people close to me." Broke my heart. I work at Toys R Us. The saddest thing is a child who knows they're not the favorite saying that they get one $10 toy and their sibling gets many toys, all of which are over that price. I was like, "Oh, is it your brother's birthday?" to this little girl who was getting one little doll when her brother was getting Nerf guns and video games. She looked at me and went, "Mom and Grandma buy him everything he wants. I'm used to it." A story for a similar phrase. It's just easier this way. Cousin was getting married at her stepdad's ranch house and invited everybody, including her father and us. They had one of those through the years photo albums on the TV playing throughout the night. Despite the fact that her father raised her in a loving home till she was 16, there were absolutely no photos of her father anywhere in the video. Multiple people on both sides noticed. She was eventually confronted about it and said that it was put together by her mother and it wasn't worth arguing over. She then had her stepdad walk her down the aisle in front of her father. Nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers getting the living snot kicked out of them by violent, abusive people in the hospital, and the police doing absolutely nothing about all of it. I did security in an emergency ward, and I really was not prepared for how violent it was. Also, I was not prepared for how little the police did. It was practically impossible to get them to show up, and on the extremely rare occasions they did, they never arrested anyone. I remember the first day I was filling out an incident report where a nurse got knocked down flat. I'm apologizing to her, saying that I'd been on the phone and can't even get the police to show up. And she said, "That's okay, I'm used to it, and you better get used to it too." Wanting to hang out with someone and either they already have plans or you later find out they did something fun with your group of friends and they didn't invite you. Now I'll usually say, "It's fine, go have fun," / "glad you had fun," but it's not really fine. I've just gotten used to it. My mom had a stillborn daughter when I was in the 8th grade. A few years later, she tried again and got pregnant with triplet boys. One of them had developmental issues and apparently caused issues for the other two, and they were also stillborn. My sister and I felt horrible at the thought of losing so many siblings, and even worse for what our mom was going through all over again. Our stepdad was broken inside. He really wanted children of his own, and we all knew that. It's not that he loved us any less. He's a great man. Just that he always wanted to raise a child. A few years later, my mom got pregnant totally by accident. We were all talking one day and it slipped by my sister, "What if it happens again?" My mom's face got this really distant look and she just said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I had to get up and go to the other room because I didn't want to be seen crying. However, there is a happy ending. Our little sister was born healthy. Minor birth complications, needing an immediate C-section, which terrified us. But she's 6 now and a bundle of energy that can rival any tornado. She's the accidental miracle and the best thing that's happened to the family. I'm really glad we got to get a happy ending squeezed somewhere in here. I knew this girl for like 10 years because of Girl Scouts, but didn't become real good friends until high school. I'd never had a sleepover with her outside of Girl Scout activities, and the first time I slept over, I could hear her dad screaming at her brothers for not cleaning up the game room and some other stuff, and then screaming at his wife, my Girl Scout leader, for whatever the boys did or didn't do. I was so scared, and my friend just kind of ignored it. I was like, "Wow, he sounds really upset. Are your brothers okay?" And she basically told me it was a normal occurrence in her house. I remember walking out to go to the bathroom and one of her brothers, who likes to act like a tough guy, was crying and cleaning the bathroom. I always had a weird feeling about her dad. Like, he liked to act like the good, funny suburban Christian dad when everyone was around. But even when I was young, I felt like he was really condescending. No one in that family deserved that sort of treatment from him. One of the brothers had been adopted a few years prior from China, and I felt like he was so unfortunate to have such a horrible dad and a brother who took things out on him because he felt like crap too. Anyways, the saddest thing is when you learn your friends have 1 or 2 crappy parents who act horrible and they're so used to being screamed at all the time. For me, the saddest moments are when they can still have a normal expression while saying it. If someone says "I'm used to it" while crying, it kind of means they're not really used to it. There was a kid in my class when I was around 8 years old that was really unpopular because he was poor and often got bullied. After a while, he found his place as the guy that does stupid stuff and hurts himself to try and fit in. There was actually a toughness session, but in reality, it was just people beating the ever-loving crap out of him while he just stood there without reacting, as well as him putting out cigarettes using his arms and hands. Even let people whip him with long, thin branches while not reacting at all, just so he could fit in and have friends. I remember the teacher finding out and getting so incredibly angry at everyone and started yelling at our entire class in the middle of the class. He straight up begged her to stop blaming people, as he'd finally found what he called friends. Anyway, she told him to pull up his sleeves, and there were bloody whip marks, bruises, and burns all over his arms. The guy just looks at her with a smile and says that he's used to it and he's really happy. The teacher straight up starts to cry and pull him out of the class. Didn't see him for a long time after that because he got placed in a foster home, and as it turns out, he actually was used to it because he'd been beaten at home for as long as he could remember. Now that I'm older, I realize just how heartbreaking it would be to see a tortured 8-year-old boy act all happy because he managed to get fake friends by being beaten repeatedly. Nerve damage in my back. I've seen quite a few high-level doctors about it. Just went to see the last one before I knew there was nothing else I could do and know that it would never heal and I would be stuck this way forever. It was the first appointment my parents actually went to with me. In my mid-20s and don't live at home, but I guess after a few years, they were frustrated that I had never gotten any help. After a few hours there in a nerve conduction study that lasted almost 3 hours, no change. Nothing they can do to help. My mom and dad were upset when the doctor, seeming genuinely sorry, said there was nothing they could do. Having seen lots of doctors before this who all responded the same way over the last 2 years, I responded something like, "It's okay, doctor. I figured that's what you'd say. Just wanted to get a final opinion." Which sent my parents over the edge. I guess they expected something to happen or some magic surgery to exist. Not to be told by an expert, "Sorry, nothing we can do." And for me to be so nonchalant about it. It sucks, but I'm used to it. My stepdaughter came home from her boyfriend's house complaining of a headache. When I asked a few more questions, she finally told me he'd hit her really hard in the back of the head, had a big goose egg-sized lump and a scab. I was horrified and asked, why is she even still with him after that? She just said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I wish I could do something to help with her self-esteem, but no matter what I tell her or how much I care about her, she needs to figure out how to love herself. When I was 15 or 16, my friends told this really big girl that I liked her as a joke. It was crappy, but she believed them. I flagged her down after gym class to tell her the truth, and when I did, she goes, "Yeah, it's okay. People don't ever have feelings for me. I'm used to pranks like this." I distinctly remember punching my friend that did that in the chest like 6 or 7 times during study hall the next period. It was heartbreaking. When I was 19 and dating my current partner, I was squatting in an abandoned, flea-infested, decaying house while I scraped by on food stamps and working 8 hours a week because my job was cutting everyone. A friend offered to let me move in with them for a while, but didn't want me to bring my best friend and last member of my family, my cat. I tried to take him to an animal rescue place, but the attendant decided that my cat was too aggressive after he manhandled him pretty hard. As I sat in my partner's car and held my cat's crate close to my heart, he lamented to me how unfair this all was and how he knew my cat meant everything to me, and how our only option seemed to be to take him to the shelter that told me point blank that if I took a cat there, they would kill him. I looked at him full of despair at the thought that I had failed my little buddy, who had been my constant companion through deaths and abandonment and homelessness, and honestly stated, "It's okay, I'm used to it." To me, it was Tuesday. To him, he was witnessing the saddest thing he had ever seen happening to someone he was quickly falling in love with, and he began to cry. I was so surprised by his reaction because why would anyone cry over me or my problems? The good news is my friend changed their mind and I got to keep him. And when I eventually moved in with my partner, he let me take him even though he's deathly allergic to cats. And we found ways to work around it for a number of years until my cat eventually passed away due to natural causes. I miss my little buddy, my constant companion, every day. But I'm so thankful I got the time with him that I did. I know how many people hate on cats and say they're horrible, but that cat was everything to me, the adorable little rascal. And he loved me in a way that I believe few people in this world get to experience from an animal. I'm that guy who always seems to be on the edge of friend groups, or at least I used to. I was that one who always got talked over by other people, or people wouldn't realize I was talking at all. I was just used to being that guy, the one who was just kind of there. Got to college and found a group of friends that I really do interact with, and it's amazing how different that is. Basically, whenever nobody bothers to learn how to say someone's name properly, especially if it's unusual or exotic for the area. It's a basic unit of respect and acknowledging someone as a person, learning to say their name correctly. I have a really unusual first and last name, and a lot of people who have known me for years, coworkers, etc., still don't say it correctly, despite multiple corrections. So I'm super conscientious of making sure I pronounce other people's names correctly. Often the response I get is a very surprised and grateful, "No one ever tries," which is pretty similar to "I'm used to it." I have a happy one to counterbalance such heartbreaking stories. I often go in the forest and dogs run up to me and want to jump up. I don't have the heart to say no because they look so happy to see me. The owners are always so embarrassed as I'll get a little money, but I tell them I work with animals, so I'm used to it. Met some great dogs this way. Yes, we get to end on a happy one, and there are dogs in it.
What was the worst time you walked in on someone? I was living with my grandparents when I was about 19 years old, and I came home early one day from work. I walked into the bathroom and saw my grandfather, who was like 80 at the time, butt naked, staring at himself in the mirror. He was smiling and shaking around his schlong. After we both made eye contact, we both said, "Oh crap," and just turned around. I'll never forget that image in my head as long as I live.
Traumatizing, but not that bad. When I was 8, I walked in on my dad banging my mom's best friend in my bed. She was babysitting and he was supposed to be at work. They were loud and I went to see what the noise was. My dad screamed at me to go away, so I got out of there without actually seeing them. I told my mom when she got home and she ended up spending the night in jail for breaking her best friend's nose. When she got home, she beat the crap out of my dad with a baseball bat. Wasn't the first or last time he cheated on her either. I got an awesome new Princess Jasmine bedding set out of it though. I just want to go on record that infidelity and abuse are a big no-no, and this kind of behavior really messed me up mentally growing up. OPS for the worst, so I gave it and tried to be entertaining about it. And yes, the sheets were to replace the ones my dad banged on. I still stand by my statement that Princess Jasmine is awesome.
Well, that's a twofer right there. First you walk in on your father cheating on your mother, and then the spousal abuse? That's pretty bad. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 guys, so it was 2 guys per room. I usually left first because of my job. One day I realized I'd forgotten some important documents and came back to get them. I opened up the door to my room and found my roommate laying naked on his bed, legs up in the air and blow-drying his balls. He later explained to me that he had some sort of jock itch and needed to keep that area moisture-free. That image is burned into my brain to this day, and on his birthday, every year, I send him a picture of a blow-dryer.
Look, itches in tender places are just hell. I don't blame the dude, but lock the door, put a note up or something. Demoisturizing balls, knock please. So I'm out tent camping in a state park. It's early morning, maybe 6-ish. I need the restroom down the path. I grab my shaving kit, start walking the 500 yards. About halfway, I hear a noise and look to my left, directly into the eyes of a dude hammering away at his girl doggy style inside their tent with the door open. I pause, kinda shocked. Dude waves at me. I wave back. Girl looks up. She waves. I wave back. They continue banging. I continue walking. I guess they just really wanted to be fully in touch with nature. Like if they're leaving the tent door open and everything, they wanted to be seen.
I, 25F, was being towed around a house I was planning to rent a room in from Craigslist by the owner. The last bedroom door was closed, so he knocked and opened the door to reveal a husky man with headphones on, aggressively beating off. I still rented the room.
I'm reminded of that meme where Hank Hill walks into the room. I freaking love King of the Hill, by the way. And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was a... Oh, good Lord!"
I didn't personally walk in, but my mom did. I was told to stay outside. I was about 15, and me and my best friend, along with my mom, went shopping, and we came home to see my brother's girlfriend's car parked in our driveway. So me and my friends were all like, "Oh, you know what they're doing," and my mom was brushing us off. She told us to wait outside and went into the house and quickly came out covering her eyes, repeating, "I saw nothing." She caught my brother and his girlfriend mid-act in the living room. My mom was mortified, and me and my friend were thrilled we were right.
Doesn't matter how traumatized the mom is from seeing her little boy being a man, it just matters that you were right.
A walking-in story from a party I was at when we were all about 17 to 18. A couple of hours in, everyone had turned up except one of the birthday girl's best friends. She eventually calls and says she's out at a club and can she bring the guy she's met, whose name is apparently Sketch. Half an hour later, they turn up pretty drunk. After about 15 minutes, we realize they have vanished upstairs. Birthday girl doesn't really want them fooling around in her bed, but no one wants to walk in on them either. So we send the drunkest guy up to call them down. He toddles off upstairs and then about a minute later comes back into the living room looking pale and distraught. He sits down. We ask what happened.
I went upstairs and opened the door, and he was going down on her. And then he looked over at me, and I think he was a vampire. There was blood all over his mouth, so I left.
Turned out they started fooling around and it became clear it was her time of the month, but Sketch decided to power on through. We accidentally sent up the one person who in a drunken haze was not mentally equipped to deal with this at all. He looked broken for the rest of the night.
Can't say I blame the guy. That probably would have kind of ruined my night as well.
So, this happened last semester, but I got home around 11:30 p.m. and no one was home. I'm like, alright, whatever. I go to my room, throw my stuff down and grab my water bottle. I walk into the kitchen to fill it where the front door is, small 3 BDRM apartment through the school. And in walks this girl. I'm like, what the hell is this girl doing in my house? We make eye contact. I realize it's my roommate in full drag. Fake boobs, wig, high heels, all of it. All he says is,
I can explain.
already having seen a lot of this kid's oddities, I just say, don't bother, you do you, man. And I just went to fill my bottle and continued to play Civ or something the rest of the night. He now occasionally just chills in drag and talks makeup and clothes with my other roommate's girlfriend. I'm riding this sitting next to this 7-foot unicycle propped against the wall. It's been an interesting year to say the least.
Disgusting. Utterly debaucherous. I cannot abide by a 7-foot goddamn unicycle. 4 foot is the max that a unicycle should be. You'll break your goddamn neck riding that thing. It's just impractical. TLDR, I'm probably in a smut video online titled RA Interrupts Gay Threesome. What happens next you won't believe. I used to be a resident assistant. I was doing room inspections with my partner, RA. I had given all my residents over a week notice, taped a letter to their door alerting them that I would be coming around. Everything was going fine until we got to room 312. I still remember the room number to this day. We knocked on the door 3 times with no answer. I announced that I was keying into the dorm. We get inside. Everything's normal. I go to the individual bedrooms and knock 3 times again. As soon as I announce I'm keying in, my residents open the door in just gym shorts. Hey, what's up? Live Legacy? Just doing our scheduled room checks? Oh, okay, come on in, without even hesitating or giving me a warning on what I was about to walk into. As he opens the door, I see a naked man dart across the room and into the bathroom. I didn't know he was gay, so that was surprising. But then I walk into the room and look to my left. I see a tiny Asian man was standing in the corner with a laptop in front of him. He was only wearing a cheetah print thong. I quickly avert my eyes and look to my right and I see a camera on a tripod. I dart out of there immediately yelling, "You passed, have a nice day." They could have had kilos of booger sugar in the corner and I wouldn't have cared.
How on earth did this one not get gold? This one was hilarious.
Didn't really walk in, but the most traumatizing time, when I was 6, I had friends over for a play date and I went to go hide underneath my grandparents' bed with my friends. My grandparents came into the room after us, so they had no idea we were in there, so they started undressing and went on the bed. Sound started. I started crying, but they were basically deaf, so they couldn't hear me. But my mom walked by the room and thought she heard me crying, so she walks in. Grandparents start screaming at my mom. Mom starts screaming at my grandparents. I run out from under the bed with my friends trailing behind me. It was awful.
That is basically the exact same thing that happened in an episode of F is for Family, which is a hilarious show. Another, not walked in, but my parents divorced when I was a baby. I ended up living with my dad and got very sporadic visits from my mom in my hometown of hers. I lived half the country away from her. One summer, in the first few days of a visit to her town, I thought I was alone in the house. I was 15. My siblings were several years younger than me and out playing with their friends, and my stepdad and mom, I thought, were at work. It's hot outside, my stepdad is a tightwad, so there was no AC in the house. I decided I was going to go upstairs and soak in a cool bath for a bit. Since I think I'm alone, I start shedding clothes as I'm going upstairs instead of waiting to get into the bathroom. As soon as I reach the top of the stairs, my mom jumps out wearing nothing but a lacy thong and yells, "Surprise!" Turns out my stepdad was supposed to be home early that day, and since I had only been there a couple of days, she assumed the heavy footsteps coming up the stairs were his. So there was a very surprised, almost naked 15-year-old looking at a very surprised, naked 32-year-old who also happened to be his mom. We talked about it one time several weeks later just so she could explain, and it hasn't been mentioned since. For you weirdos, no arms were broken, I was repulsed, not aroused, and I guess you would have to ask her many partners over the last 4 decades if she was hot. I'm not mad at y'all though, this is what makes Reddit worth my time.
It's like a double KO in a fighting game, only with trauma. Double trauma. I was 12 at a sleepover with a good friend of mine. It was around mid-afternoon. I was getting myself some water when I come back to see my friend getting lectured about how messy his room was. It was immaculate, and how he should take responsibility for things. He did. His dad is pulling up carpet fuzz and yelling at him for it. My friend is crying. I kind of pretend that I didn't walk in on that and hung out in the kitchen reading cereal box ingredients. As soon as the dad walks out, his girlfriend comes in through the door in tears. She had told her Corvette running a red light, and now the boyfriend was hysterical, yelling at her and us. They go to their room and there's this banging and fighting noise. Then everything was normal. Took me bloody forever to realize they were addicted to booger sugar. The dad and the girlfriend sound like absolute tosspots. That's all I have to say on that, really.
I went on a road trip with my family when I was like 13 or so. We stopped overnight at a motel and my mom asked me to fill the ice bucket with ice from the machine down the hall. I grabbed the bucket and went off to fill it up. When I got back, I had the terrible realization that I didn't remember what our room number was. Starting to panic, figured the only thing to do was to pick a door at random and hope for the best. I picked a door. It was the wrong door. An old man answered wearing nothing but tighty whities, a wife beater, and black dress socks. Behind him, 2 other similarly clad gentlemen sat on the bed next to 3 old ladies in negligee. I asked them where the ice machine was, even though I already had ice in the bucket that I was holding in my hands. He pointed down the hall and I said, "Thank you," and took off. I guess my mom heard me and opened the door to wave me back in. I was only off by a few doors. Worst episode of Showcase Showdown ever.
And then you have to sit there and wonder what they're doing a few doors down from you the entire time. Awful.
Technically, I didn't walk in on this situation, but bear with me. Something I liked to do when I was very young was bring shoes into the different rooms of the house. I was always very proud of myself and wanted to show everyone that I brought more shoes indoors. Once, I had the brilliant idea to hide in my parents' closet with a pair of shoes so I could surprise them with my ingenuity of now hiding shoes in their closet. I made this, what I thought to be at the time, a very well thought out and super professionally planned scheme. Step 1 of my plan was to set into motion my getting the shoes and bringing them into the room with me undetected. This proved to be an easy success. Step 2 was supposed to go a little something along the lines of show them the shoes once they came into the room, etc., etc. That is where my plan goes all wrong. There I was, sitting in the closet waiting for my parents to re-enter their room when I finally heard the door open. Just as I got my stuff together and was ready to leap from my hiding place and bombard my parents with shoes, I froze. I heard my mom moaning and stopped in my tracks, not knowing what I was supposed to do. Now my plan had been disrupted. So I peeked from the crack in the door of the closet to see what was happening and saw my parents getting it on. I didn't know what to do and knew that it would be more awkward for me to open the door and leave than just sit and wait for it to be over. So, logically, I sat and waited. When my parents left the room, I waited a bit before leaving the room myself and pretended it never happened.
A specific individual sounds more like they're a dog with the ability to use a keyboard with a Reddit account.
Probably late to the party, but I'll post anyways. I was the one walked in on. In high school, I snuck out of the house late at night to meet some friends. And let's just say I was very hungry when I got home. So I raided the kitchen pantry and took the only 2 edible things that were ready to eat. Plain tortilla chips and plain Hershey's chocolate bars. I go up to my room and start eating the chocolate and chips. Mind you, I sleep naked and it was a little warm in the house. So I'm naked on top of all the blankets, and with the state of mind I was in, I was making a pretty big mess. Crumbs and chocolate bits getting all over my chest. Well, then I pass out. Here comes the problem. I have always been hard to wake up. We're talking now I have to set 12 alarms every morning for work. So every morning my parents, Mom until this incident, would come to my room, open my door, turn on my light, say time to get up, and close the door. Turning on the light was the only way to get me out of bed. So, my poor mother comes to my room to wake 17-year-old me up, and as a 17-year-old boy who is just waking up, I was fully erect. Doors open, lights flip on, and there is her son laying like a dead starfish on his bed, chips, crumbs, and melted chocolate all over his chest with a raging boner. Not only that, but from her angle, she's staring right down the devil's alley at my taint, balls, and boner. So she screams at the top of her lungs. This scares the crap out of me, so I wake up and start screaming at the top of my lungs. Now she's kind of running in place, flapping her arms around, screaming. I'm screaming naked in horror in my bed, and my dad comes bounding over thinking something is wrong and bursts the door fully open. He yells, "Oh, what the hell?" I try to yell, "Get out!" and cover myself, but really just manage to yell, "Grrr!" as I rip the blanket up and fall off the bed to the side. Breakfast was quiet that morning. I'm going to use the devil's alley in the future. That was funny as hell.
I would just like to preface I was 5 years old. I was at a campground and headed over to a friend's camper to wake her up in the AM. I walked up to the loft area and shouted her name. Turns out she was in the room to the left, not the right. Her cousin shot up out of bed, staring right at me like my holler was a fire alarm. This wouldn't be worse until you consider she had a glass eye that apparently drifted inwards while she slept. I had no idea who this woman was or what was up with her eye, but I screamed, "No!" the second she opened her eyes. I ran 90 miles per hour that morning back to my place. The worst part was my naive reaction, clearly.
I know a swath of very different people, but I've never met anyone with a glass eye personally. Yet. Or as far as I know. Not sure if this belongs here, but it's a nice departure from all the 18-plus related stories already posted in the comments, so here goes anyway. This happened in 2005. I was 21 years old and working my first full-time job during university vacation. One day, my boss allowed me to go home early, so I raced home excited and looking forward to an afternoon enjoying the epic summer weather. I parked my car in our garage, and as I walked through the two interleading doors into the kitchen, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps running down our passage away from me towards the 3 bedrooms. I knew my 19-year-old sister was home, so I just assumed that what I'd heard was the sound of one of the many female friends she regularly had over. She was a total socialite, running away from me. I figured maybe said friend had been slightly undressed or something. I don't know, I didn't have much time to think because what happened next happened really fast. A few steps later, and I'm in the dining room from which the rest of the house fans out in 3 different directions. Then I see my parents' bedroom door at the end of the passage open up, and my sister sticks her head out and screams at me, "You mad though? Get out, there are 2 guys in the house." As she says that, she slams the door closed again. And then, sure enough, 2 black guys appear from one of the bedrooms off the passage. They're both slightly younger, maybe 19 years old and much skinnier than me. Bizarrely, my first instinct was to negotiate with them to get them to leave. I think the reason for this was that both looked as surprised to see me as I was them, and it was clear that they hadn't planned for this, so I think I figured, well, now that they'd been caught, they'd readily leave. My only thought was to get them out of the house. At this point, I still didn't know what my sister's condition was, whether she'd been hurt or anything. On my way there, I'm also trying to figure out how I'm going to open the door to let them out because I've left my house key in the kitchen where I came in, and there's no key nearby to open the locked steel security gate. Before I get the chance to even make a plan as I reach the entrance hall, suddenly both guys jump on me and stop me from going any further. I grab onto the door frame for dear life, and right about now I notice that one of them is armed with a huge knife from our kitchen. Oh crap, I think. I'm about to feel what it's like to get stabbed, but by some miracle he doesn't stab me. Now I'm screaming for help louder than I've screamed in my entire existence, hoping that I'll be loud enough for someone to hear outside the house and bring help. And in the meantime, these 2 guys are trying harder and harder to pull me off the door frame. My shirt tears in half and I sprain 3 fingers from the strain of holding onto that damn frame. Then a moment of clarity. I remember that there's a panic button linked to our armed response company right outside my parents' bedroom. I scream my sister, press the panic button, and I hope she hears me because I'm all out of ideas and all out of hope. Then I hear her shout the last thing I wanted to hear. I can't.
I'm tied up. The panic button is mounted at like shoulder height on the wall. In that moment, the most dire sense of panic and fear sets in. People say about scary moments that I nearly shat myself, and suddenly I almost understand what that means. I can feel my butthole puckering uncontrollably while I wonder what the hell is going to happen to me now that nobody is coming for help. Just as I'm giving up hope, the house alarm starts wailing. It is loud, so loud it physically hurts my ears, and the siren is mounted in the ceiling right above me and these two thugs, so it is super uncomfortable. I scream at the thugs that the police are coming. I noticed that they looked almost as afraid as I am. They let go of me and run down the passage. Turns out they left via my bedroom window. I later learned that following my scream for her to press the panic button, my sister was somehow able to sort of shimmy her way up the wall from a prone position to where she could reach the panic button. I also learned that frighteningly, thanks to recent home renovations, the wire in the room next door linking the alarm system to the phone line had been cut. So although the alarm went off, nobody was coming to help. Fortunately, the two thugs didn't know that. This whole episode must have taken no longer than maybe 2 minutes tops, but it felt like it went on for a half hour. Anyway, seconds later, there's a knock on the door. It's my friend Bruce popping over for a visit, and I'm still in such shock at that point that I can barely think straight enough to let him in. But I did, and it's lucky he was there as he went to find my sister and untied her. Fortunately, she was unharmed, although she was convinced that the two had planned to grape her and that the only thing that prevented it was my early arrival home. We immediately called the cops, who arrived very quickly along with a volunteer trauma counselor, our armed response guy, and an armada of the other security companies and agencies in the area. They are all linked to the same radio network and all assist each other very effectively. In spite of the police's genuinely best efforts, by then it was too late, and unfortunately, the two thugs were never caught. On the plus side, my folks immediately bought a new house in a much safer suburb far from that one, and within a few months, we were out of that hellhole of a suburb. And also, it forced me to take stock of my personal safety, so now I'm far more aware and I'm far more prepared should anything like that ever happen again. God forbid. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same thing right now. I want to hit the gym so goddamn hard right now. It's these kind of situations that you need to be prepared for. And having a home invader, two home invaders, is probably absolutely terrifying, especially when you've got family that you don't know what their condition is. Like, I can completely understand why this dude's mind just went completely blank, why he reacted the way he did. I know I'd go absolutely berserk if there was a stranger in my house, stealing my stuff, trying to hurt my family. I don't frickin' know. But then again, in the UK, you're not actually allowed to defend yourself, it seems, from people who are trying to commit violent acts against you because our laws are, well, I can't use that word, but I'll say stupid, and you can think about what I actually wanted to say. Anyway, try and stay sharp. Be ready for people who try to mess you about, hurt you, whatever. Hit the gym a little bit. Do a bloody boxing class or something. I did frickin' Jeet Kune Do, and frankly, this has put me in a foul mood all of a sudden.
Teachers of Reddit, what was the trashiest thing you've seen a parent do? I work at a school where over 80% of our population lives under the poverty line. I keep a cabinet full of hygiene products for kids to take. Deodorant, lotion, chapstick, hair gel, feminine hygiene products, shampoo, conditioner, those kinds of things, in travel sizes. Being a teen is hard enough without having to cope with hygiene problems due to a lack of funds at home. So one day the entire thing is empty. Odd. I refill the cabinet and 2 days later, all of it's gone again. I refill it with the last of my supplies and catch the kid in the act of sweeping everything in his bag. I stop him and take him into the other room to talk to him. He'd told his mother about the cabinet and she'd ordered him to bring her everything he could get. She was returning the items to Walmart for store credit to buy cigarettes and beer. I told him to tell her the cabinet's locked now. I bought a bike lock so it was not a lie. It was sickening. Mother came to a school sports day swigging from a bottle of wine. We always felt desperately sorry for her daughter, because whenever she returned to school following a holiday at home, this was boarding school, we had to wash all her clothes because they reeked of cigarettes. And this poor little girl was easily the most unhappy child I've ever seen. Woman I used to babysit for worked in a school as an assistant or something in Toronto. She always told this story about how the class rabbit would go home with a new kid each week. They kept trying to avoid giving one kid the bunny for the weekend because it was clear his home life wasn't the best. But they finally caved and let him take the rabbit home. The parents killed the rabbit and ate it. They killed the class bunny and fried it up for dinner. They weren't even ashamed when they told the teacher what happened on Monday. Said they were out of groceries or something. My mom's a teacher, and in order to talk to a parent about a child that was struggling due to the school environment, she arranged to meet at the parent's house. Keep in mind, this was scheduled in advance with a set time. The dad answered the door 100% naked and proceeded to have the meeting naked right there on the front porch. My mom doesn't do anything outside the school anymore. Well, in my profession, it's more often what the parents don't do that wins them the Parent of the Year award. But I do have a couple of Hall of Famers. I'm a special education teacher, so I deal with kids with all kinds of physical, emotional, and academic disabilities. I took care of a little girl who had a number of complications due to spina bifida. Her mother couldn't be bothered to take care of her. The girl wore diapers and was cathed. She requires 3 to 5 diaper changes a day. Mom would only send 5 diapers a week. The thing is, she was getting full services from her community, so she was being provided with plenty of supplies. We suspect Mom was probably selling the extras. I ended up just buying her diapers. Mom would not change her catheter regularly. We would change it out at school, but other than that, she'd go another 24 hours before a change out. Longer if it was a weekend. The smell from the infections she'd get after a weekend was horrendous. She had lice constantly and oozing bedbug sores. Mom would always just tell us to F off when we'd call her and tell her to take her to a doctor. Found out later in the year that she also had scabies. We offered to administer the medications and creams at school. Mom told us to go to hell. Girl would come to school in men's underwear, XXL shirts, and size 16 pants. She was 8. Finally discovered that her 9-year-old sister was changing her diapers and dressing her every day, and sister couldn't find any other cleanish clothes to put on her. Mom's response? I'm busy, I have to get to work in the mornings. Final straw was when the nurse discovered what appeared to be STD warts while changing her diaper one day. Nurse made for the 10th time another CPS report, but principal insisted that we call home and report our findings. Grandma found out, tipped off Mom, and Mom appeared at the school 15 minutes later, snatched up the kids and disappeared. Investigators showed up 15 minutes later, but Mom was already long gone. Never saw the kids again. Staff raised money to get an 8-year-old girl a winter coat. We live in rural Canada. Girl came to school the next day in a t-shirt in the dead of winter. Her mom wearing the brand new child-sized jacket. The principal confronted her about it, and Mom told her to F off, and anything her kids owned belonged to her and she could do with what she wanted. Child aid was called, and that student lives with a very nice foster family now. Mom was rail thin too. Looked like the stereotypical junkie archetype. The sleeves were 3 inches too short, didn't cover most of her stomach, and she couldn't do it up properly. Our vice principal is a former army sergeant who's built like a tank. He's well-liked and an amazing role model in a community where many of our kids don't have a good male role model. On several occasions, I've seen mothers step well over the line and make very sexual comments to him directly in front of their kids. I mean, in plain sight of their own children, and in ways the kids notice. He's always very respectful and often asks another staff member to join him if he sees one of these parents coming to talk. But it's pretty trashy when it comes to some of the innuendo I've overheard. These aren't jokes either. They try to get handsy with him too. My cousin is a teacher, and she once had a parent come to a parent-teacher conference extremely drunk, and right before the meeting, tried to pull out a bag of drugs and start doing them. Police were called, and so was CPS. The school also had to call 911 once because a parent overdosed in the parking lot while waiting to pick up their kid, and the poor kid was too young to understand why their mom was slumped over in their car. I'm a high school teacher, and one time a parent of a child who had been going back and forth with another child on social media came to school to confront the other girl. The mom ended up bursting into my classroom to try to fight one of my 9th grade girls, sending us into a lockdown until the woman was removed by the police. I do want to make clear that the systems in place have failed this woman, her family, and her friends at basically every level, and I can understand why she felt like she didn't trust any systems to handle the situation. By the end of the school year, this particular mother was helping chaperone events and was a good role model for our young people. Her daughter was one of the best performing students in the grade. I volunteer at after-school programs to help tutor. I had a student earlier this year. Good kid. Loves math, loves computers. Wants to be a programmer when he grows up. He's really struggling in 7th grade because he has no computer at home. We have to do his online assignments at the program, but we only meet twice a week. I pulled his mom aside and explained how he could be doing much better in school with some kind of PC and internet access at home. She says that she can't afford a computer. I tell her that for $200, I could piece all the parts together myself for a fully functional setup that would be sufficient for at least the next few years. I'd even build it with him so he could learn some extremely valuable information. I'd even front her half, but she would have to pay me back. She says no way, still out of her budget. Mind you, while we're having this conversation, she's barely looking up to speak to me, too busy scrolling through the gram on her iPhone. I say forget it, I'll do it myself. I managed to scrap all the parts together I'd need for free. I only had to buy the hard drive. The setup was really out of date, but still worked, and gave it to the kid, and he was thrilled. About a month later, I notice he's trying to finish all his homework at the program again. I ask his mom if everything's okay with the computer. She says it broke down. I say, okay, what happened? I'll pick it up and I'll try to fix it. She says she had to throw it away. I pull the kid aside and ask him. He tells me she sold it to her cousin for $50. I really don't like calling people trashy when they're apparently stuck in a culture of poverty. Maybe she needs that $50 for the light bill or groceries. But at the same time, she spends 3 times that amount on her cell phone each month. So it really just broke my heart. It was like she's doing everything in her power to ensure that her kid has no chance at a decent life. I work in a school in one of the most socially deprived areas of the UK. At Parents' Evening, we give every parent a printout of their child's grades in each subject, alongside their target grades. Last year, we had the parent of an 11-year-old respond to this printout by shouting, "What the F am I gonna do with this? I can't effing read, can I?" This was in front of other children, parents, and her child's teachers. I've worked in behavior units / juvies for a few years, so you can imagine the families we get. My personal favorites, number 1, took the kids out on the last day of term, pull into the driveway, and one of the kids' mothers is standing there, can of Monster in one hand, cigarette in the other, and wearing a miniskirt and knee-high boots in the middle of winter. Number 2, one grandparent used to come in wearing a dirty singlet with his belly hanging out, would try to kiss me and call me love, darling, and babe. And number 3, a kid left grounds without permission, so didn't have his phone or anything, which we confiscate. Mom came to pick it up, and when the principal tried to engage her in a conversation about her son's behavior, she attacked him with her handbag. I have 2. There's a parent who would walk through our closed campus every single day. As teachers, we're supposed to stop her because it's a closed campus. Every single day, she would pretend she didn't know the rules. We always knew it was the same parent because she would let her younger children who weren't in school yet ride around on their scooters ahead of her. One day she was walking through with a stroller. She was not paying attention and her freaking baby started falling out of the front of the stroller. I saw 4 teachers jump up to help the kid and the mom didn't even acknowledge. The other one happened directly to me during parent-teacher conferences. I was meeting with a mom and her live-in boyfriend about her son. At the end of the conference, I asked if they had any questions I could answer for them, and he started asking me personal questions and flirting with me. I deflected and told them I had more conferences. But other teachers have told me that parents have hit on them before, so it's probably pretty common. Not a teacher, but a college administrator. Parents will call in very frequently when there's an issue with their student's living situation. If they're a jerk, which is frequent, I quote FERPA to them. Best example, I had to bill a student for around $600 in damages to their room at the end of the year. Mom called me peeved off about this because they'd tried to repair the damages, but very poorly. She ended up yelling about this over the phone, and I reminded her that her son was 22 years old and that I could only talk with him about this. Kid calls me back the next day and apologizes for his mom being a jerk to me and asks if I'm able to just feed his mom a bunch of bull when she calls back. It's a weird line of work. Not a teacher, but my dad once worked as a groundskeeper at a primary school. Worst thing he ever saw was a guy dropping his daughter off to school, and before she went through the gate, her dad went through her school bag and took out all of her packed food and left eating it, essentially leaving her with nothing to eat that day. Dad said he was so angry that he wanted to knock the guy out right then and there for leaving his child with no food for the day. But he ended up going straight to the principal to tell them what he witnessed so it could be investigated properly and get the kid help. My kid went to the preschool run by the public school system. Every student there was either 3 or 4. One day, I saw one of his classmates' moms open the front passenger door. Kid climbed in and they drove off with the radio cranked and the little girl dancing on the seat leaning against the dashboard. The back seat was totally empty, not even a car seat. The next day, I offered the lady my other kid's seat. I'd buy another one on the way home. She told me to F off and drove away with her daughter again standing on the front seat. I let the principal know and we watched the car drive into traffic towards the highway. Day 3, I've called the police, but they'll only come out if I call during the pickup. Great, that'll only take 30 minutes for them to get here. After mom drives off with daughter dancing on the seat again, I tell the principal I'm reporting the mom to family services if she won't intervene. On day 4, a guy shows up in her car and comes nose to nose with me without even so much as an introduction. He says if I keep harassing his woman, I'll regret it. I tell the principal, nothing she can do. They stop bringing the kid to school after that. My mom is a middle school teacher. Just about every day, some crap parent doesn't come pick up their kids because they literally forgot about them or were passed out drunk or on drugs. Then the poor child gets sent to daycare, which is not free. Then the horrible parents complain about the charge. My mom has had to bring random kids home before who barely know the way home. It's really sad. Parent witness to an event, but not a teacher. My kid's very first day of school. She's 4.5. In the gym hall, all the kids and parents are in lines according to class, and one by one, the teachers come and take them away. Our group was last to go. As we're waiting, a guy storms in, clearly drunk, and starts shouting at a woman in the line.
Why the F didn't you tell me this was now? I've been looking everywhere, etc., etc.
And he slapped the mom. Another dad in the line pulls drunk dad away and pushes him. He falls down on top of another kid. That mom screams. Drunk starts to run out. Squish kid's dad chasing him. He made it out of the gym, but then he got caught and had the crap kicked out of him in the school reception. Everyone is freaked out. Kids are crying. Then the very happy teacher who's completely unaware comes in. I start Googling prices for private schools. I work in a middle school with an elementary school next door. 2 girls from my school were arguing all day and told their parents about it when they got out of school. The parents proceeded to call their families up to the elementary school and fought in front of a bunch of kindergartners. Knives and everything. The cops were called, and I think some of the parents are still in jail for gun possession and parole violations. One of the kids was pulled from our school and put in foster care. My wife is a special education teacher at a school that's about a 50-50 mix between lower middle class and extreme poverty-stricken elementary student. One of her coworkers had a behavioral student that kept lashing out and having the cops called on them. His mom was never home as she was well known to be both addicted to meth and willing to sell herself to pay for said drugs. The last week of school this year, he started a bunch of fights and the principal decided to just suspend him for the last 3 days of school. The principal called to tell the mom, who was out of state and left their 8-year-old home alone, that the kid was suspended for the rest of the year. The mom responds over speaker that the school is run by dumb racist white women and she's gonna come over there and kick y'all white women's butts. And she just kept screaming that over and over. Mom is white. The kid is white. The principal hung up and CPS was called. Used to work with teenagers who had behavioral problems in a special school. One day, a student of mine had an outburst. He started punching staff and students alike while screaming. It took 5 male teachers to hold him down. The headmaster called his mom so she could pick him up. She had 10 minutes. If longer, we would call the cops. The mother arrived 8 minutes later. A woman in her late 40s with bleach blonde hair wearing a miniskirt and a crop top. She came in yelling and swearing at her son. She picked him up and smacked him on the back of the head while telling him he was a good-for-nothing idiot. I'm not a teacher, but my mother is. It was her birthday and I live 3 hours away from her. I drove to my parents' house unannounced to surprise her for her birthday. She was obviously working as it was school hours, so I drove to the school she works at just as they were finishing. I was heading to the staff room, which is behind the reception area. I was about to announce myself to the receptionist and ask to wait for my mom in the staff room when this angry as heck dad storms in. He was abusing the heck out of the poor receptionist because his daughter got in trouble for being a delinquent in class. The principal comes comes out and tries to defuse the situation, and a minute later, my mother comes in on her way to the staff room. It's hectic in there, and then all of a sudden, the angry dad headbutts the principal right in the face. My mother screams, and angry dad turns and takes one step towards her. Before he got any further, I, without thinking, punched that dude in the face and his nose disappeared. Police came shortly after and I wasn't charged. It was classified as restraining with reasonable force due to him headbutting. Happy birthday, Mom. I worked with infants in a daycare where 85% of the children were there on vouchers. The government was paying for their care because their parents couldn't. Had a mom who was 27 with 5 kids, newborn to 9-year-olds, all from different fathers. Every one of her children were mixed, but she was constantly talking about how much she hated black people. I was one of 5 other white women in a staff of 20, and she was not afraid to tell me she didn't trust the other black women with her newborn, who I practically raised from 4 weeks to nearly a year. She would only give the baby girl to me at drop-off and would often complain if she saw anyone else holding her. She would bring her kids in at opening, 6 a.m., and wouldn't come back until half an hour to an hour after closing, 6 p.m. Once, so late we had to call the police because we thought she'd abandoned them. She talked about how she wasn't making enough money and could hardly pay her rent, but always had fresh nails and went to the hair salon monthly. Her 2-year-old had very coily mixed hair and would come in with mats, tangles, and week-old braids. Some of the other black women who knew how to take care of that kind of hair would do so during the day, and the mom was always pissed about it and accused them of trying to tell her how to raise her daughter. My last day at that job, I told my director about her racist comments and behavior towards the other women. So she pulls the mom into her office to talk about it when she picked up her kids that day. Late, as per usual. A week after that, I had a coworker text me and tell me she pulled all 5 of her kids from the daycare. I never saw the little one again and think about her often. She's gonna be 2 soon. I hope she's doing okay. Not a teacher, but a parent. There's this one child that my daughter's been going to school with since kindergarten. She's, for lack of a nicer term, a bit of a jerk. I hear stories from my daughter and her friends, and whenever I come to their school to eat lunch with my kid or help out, this other girl is always like, "Why are you even here? Don't you have something better to do?" Anyway, one day I roll up to drop off in the AM. It's December in Wisconsin. This girl is running around in a tank top. I'm like, dude, where's your coat? Apparently, Mom lost it. Dropped her off at school not only without it, but in a tank top. I ran into her and her mom at TJ Maxx once and everything made sense. She looked cracked out of her mind. Not a teacher, but my mom is. She teaches the visually impaired. There are these 2 students of hers whose parents, mainly the mom, tell them that they can't do anything and won't be able to do anything, and all they do while at home is sit around because their mom makes them. However, my mom has been teaching them for about 4 years, trying to get them to believe in themselves. It mostly has worked, but recently a different teacher told them that they can't do anything as well. So that has been a huge setback for them. I just think that it's really trashy for a parent to tell their kids that they can't do anything, even though they can do many things that other people can. Last year, I taught 5th grade. I had a student for 1 block a day that was a little mentally unstable. She developed a crush on another girl and began writing a ton of creepy notes. The school was handling it, but apparently the second girl's mother didn't think that was enough, so they drove to the first girl's bus stop in the morning and started yelling and threatening her. They basically had her cornered when the bus driver showed up and had to pry this raging mom away from the student.
What was the biggest plot twist that happened in your life? My mom and I haven't really had a relationship for the past 5 years, for a lot of reasons. A couple of huge parts of that being my having left the religion that I was raised in and her having severe bipolar disorder that made her nearly impossible to deal with, which she refused to maintain treatment for. We have only spoken once in the last 5 years and it was awful. It was about a year and a half ago. I drove down to California to visit her, 450 miles from me, and tried to patch things up. It ended up in a huge blowout fight and generally went as poorly as it possibly could. We never spoke again. One morning in May this year, my dad showed up at my door randomly. He and my mom had been divorced for many years and said we needed to talk. The apartment building my mom was living in had been set on fire and she didn't make it out. I still can't believe how hard it hit me. It changed me, maybe forever. The worst part was about 3 weeks ago when I was trying to remember the password to an old PayPal account. I had to have it reset and it was sent to an old email address that I haven't used in years. When I logged in, I found an email from her, sent just shortly before she died, apologizing and trying to reconnect and make amends. We had been out of contact for so long it was the last email address she had for me, but since I hadn't been using it for years, I didn't get her message until months after her death. That is exceedingly tragic, and I just feel like even if you don't see eye to eye, you need to have some method of communication and keep each other up to date on how to get to each other, at least if there is some kind of emergency in your lives. Wife was pregnant with our third and last planned child. We ended up in ER. She was miscarrying. The nurse cried because the fetus was not viable, so there was nothing to be done. It was horrible. One of the first times I felt completely helpless as an adult. Well, turns out the miscarry was actually her body making room for twins. The girls are now 5. Went from losing 1 to gaining 2. I apologize for poor phrasing. I typed it late on mobile. Let me clear up some things. The couple previous ultrasounds only showed a single baby. There was only a single heartbeat. The miscarry symptoms, horrible cramping, pressure, blood loss, was her body preparing for twins. We did not lose a baby. We were told we were losing it by doctors and had accepted that. The position of fetus B was in a dangerous location that would make overall development and C-section very dangerous. We were told the second time that we'd more than likely lose a baby. My wife Grace was put on respite and went on to carry the twins to full term. The unlikely twin is named Grace. Smiley face. That certainly started off rocky, but turned out all right in the end, thank goodness.
I was transferred to a division. Within a few months, my new supervisor and I hated each other. She was incompetent and I spoke up when she screwed up. She made my life hell and finally decided to give me a job that she thought would make me quit. I packed up my stuff in a box and asked for help moving to my new desk. She said she didn't have anyone to spare. I was carrying my box and didn't see a spill on the floor, ironically just outside her office. I slipped, fell, and broke my knee. I am on permanent disability. Very legitimately received a huge settlement, lifetime health care, retired early. She was demoted, then fired partially due to the way she handled my case. This all happened a few years ago. Recently, when my husband and I were grocery shopping, I saw her in the store. I didn't want to see her, but my husband caught her eye and gave her a big thumbs up. She looked angry.
That sounds like a happy ending, but the fact that they're on disability for the rest of their life after breaking their knee and stuff, I would be utterly and unfathomably miserable if I could not move properly. I love being able to move. I like going out on sunny day strolls and riding my bike and stuff. The money might help, yeah, but I just appreciate my ability to move and stuff, personally.
I met a girl through Plenty of Fish and dated her for a year. She lived 6 minutes up the street from me, so we saw each other quite often. Both of us were quite introverted, so we mainly only hung out with each other. We both considered the relationship to be serious and exclusive. Anyway, right from the start of the relationship, I noticed that she would text this one guy pretty frequently. I asked her about him, and she told me that he was her tattoo artist. Just to be snoopy, I checked out the website of the place she got her tattoos done. Sure enough, there was a tattoo artist there with the same first name as the guy in her phone, but the last name was different. I asked her about it, and she quickly called me out on being paranoid, and how it was ridiculous to think that she would lie to me. I agreed, it was pretty paranoid of me. Maybe 5 months later into the relationship, I'm on Facebook and I decide to search the name of the guy in her phone. A profile comes up in the same small city we both live in, but there is no profile picture or anything. I decide to bring it up with her again because now there is 2 Facebook profiles, one who is actually a tattoo artist and one who has the same name that is in her phone. She freaks out on me for bringing it up again and tells me that I'm crazy. I agreed but just wanted a straight answer. She told me that I had nothing to be worried about. I apologized and we got over it. About a year into the relationship, I found her on Plenty of Fish. I would periodically go on there to see if she recreated her profile. We both deleted our profiles. I found a profile that I thought might be hers, but obviously no pictures. I catfished it and it turned out to be her. She was back on Plenty of Fish and looking for guys. I had all the evidence I needed and I was going to confront her with it the next day and break up with her. However, I thought that if I was going to break up with her, I was going to message this Facebook profile I had found that matched the name in her phone just out of curiosity. Plot twist. I message the guy. He gets back to me immediately. We converse and it turns out that he is her boyfriend. I had been her second boyfriend the entire time. She met him 2 months before she met me. She bounced back between me and him for an entire year. Neither me or him knew about each other. He saw my name in her phone once and she said that I was her tattoo artist. Every time I ever called her out, I was right. Every time she was gone mysteriously at night, she was with him. Every time she said she she was hanging out with a friend of hers? She was with him. She doesn't actually have any friends. It was always him. Anyway, we both broke up with her the next morning and met the next day to have a beer. Haven't spoken with him since.
While I find behavior like this somewhat reprehensible, I must say it is rather impressive she kept this charade going for over a year. But I will also say that this person sounds like a naturally paranoid individual, but they were absolutely on point.
Bill was a self-made millionaire by the time he was 18 years old. That was in the mid-'80s. He has been one of my best and certainly most influential friends. 25 years ago, he married a girl that I did not like or trust. I told him as much, but he married her weird butt anyway. A few years ago, she ran off with a guy she met at a roller skating rink. He apparently wooed her with his zooming around or whatever, and Bill was single again. He met a girl and I insisted I meet her. Bill remembered that I had not approved of his ex. We met for lunch at one of those awful buffets. The girl was beautiful. She used English like a scalpel, working on a PhD. She was awesome. But I noticed little things about her. She had obviously been to finishing school. Then why did she have fingernail polish on her cuticles and a dress from a 1985 resale rack? There were just a lot of details that didn't add up, and Bill was getting ready to marry her. I told Bill that I thought she was hiding something, but I didn't care. This gal was high class and high bred. I told him she was great. Bill hadn't met her parents till the wedding. It was at their beach house in Destin. It turns out that my friend hadn't told his new bride of his formidable wealth, but she had been hiding the fact that her parents are legit billionaires. Bill deserves someone like her.
And I wish Bill all the happiness in the world. I have one that is straight out of a goddamn soap opera, and I'm fully ready to accept people calling bullcrap on it, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. I was very good friends with a guy in high school named John who was dating a lovely guy named Jenny, Polish or something. I can't recall, but that's sort of irrelevant, and was madly in love with him. He carried Jenny's picture around in his wallet, and every time they were together, they were super sweet. Really adorable couple. Then, one day, Jenny starts acting really strange and distant. Doesn't answer John's phone calls, doesn't spend time with us, the whole works. He flat out broke up with John and broke the poor guy's heart. I bought a spare t-shirt for a few days because my shoulder would be soaked from him crying on it. And then it got even worse. John called me one afternoon after school and begged me to come over because he needed a friend. When I got there, he told me that Jenny had been killed in a car accident and he was absolutely devastated all over again. I went with him to the funeral a few days later for moral support and he was just broken. Spent a couple of weeks just moping and being depressed. And here comes the plot twist. Are you ready for this crap? He gets a frickin' call from Jenny. He had a twin brother that we never knew about who was apparently a big troublemaker, and he had been sent off to boarding school. When he'd be home to visit last, they'd swap places for some reason that I never found out. Either simply for a laugh or for some other reason I never knew, but they did. His twin was the one that had been avoiding John and broke up with him, and he had been drinking and doing illegal substances before he got into the accident that killed him. Jenny had been off at boarding school, so he wasn't able to make it back for the funeral, and when he did get home, he had to work up his nerve for a few days to tell his parents what they'd done, which led to them realizing that the child they thought was dead was actually alive, and vice versa, which led to some fun family complications, not the least of which being obituary retractions, headstone replacements, and lots of screaming apparently. Meanwhile, John and him had a whirlwind romance afterwards and a giddy fit of reunited bliss, but it fizzled out after a month or so because John was furious after the reality sank in at what Jenny had done without telling him and letting him be so miserable all that time. Not to mention letting him think that he died. I was the third-party observer in all this, but to this day, it's probably the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened in my life. Well, this just had everything. Illegal substances, alcohol, romance, identical twins. Yeah, they're right, it is straight out of a goddamn drama.
Told this before and will again. I was a little goth girl in high school and secretly had a mad crush on an upperclassman that was a wrestler and did cross country. My cousin, who was Little Miss Socialite, also had a crush on him and hit on him constantly. He and I were complete opposites. We rode the same bus and I was pretty sure I was invisible to him. So one day, his friends start picking on me. He gets up from the front of the bus, moves to where his buddies and I are sat, and sits down next to me, throws his arm around me, and they stop. This annoys the hell out of my cousin as he and I become friends friends, and he constantly ignores her advances. She later goes on to have me expelled by saying I had a bomb and was going to blow up the school because she didn't like this or that her BF and I were close friends. This ruined every friendship I had except the one with my and her crush. He and I remained friends even after he moved away, and then closer friends when he moved back. Today, he and I are going on 4 years together. We bought a house and car, had a daughter, and are working on plans to build our next and probably permanent home. 10 years later, that B-word is still greener than a Granny Smith apple.
Little did the cute AF goth girl's cousin know is that when she accused her of being a literal terrorist, it only made him want her more. Had a child with a woman I didn't love. Gave up my entire life to move states to try and give it a go. Became depressed and made the decision to move back home after realizing it just wasn't working. She filed for child support and thus began the gauntlet of her parents reminding me of how I abandoned my son and family and that I was a piece of crap. Ex wouldn't let me talk to my son unless I paid child support plus additional expenses, which I did because what did I know about being a father at 23? Still made monthly drives to see my son because I loved him. She became increasingly addicted to illegal substances and moved my son from state to state, turning to family members she could leech from. Parents told me I would never see my son again because I don't deserve him. I sued for sole custody, and I'm currently owed $60,000 in back child support and lawyer fees. She's been held in contempt 4 times, and we have a compliance hearing coming up on the 10th. She doesn't attempt to speak to my son, and now 6. He wasn't yet 4 the last time they spoke, and current girlfriend of 5 years is referred to as Mom.
You know, good for this guy. Seems to have gone through a lot of personal suffering and well chuffed that he persevered and now happier than ever. Hell yeah. I worked in morning radio and I was also an accomplished bowler. One day I mentioned something about a high score I had and a listener called in and challenged me because he had just bowled a perfect game the week before. We worked out the details, and since we had the same first name, I said the loser has to legally change their name for 1 year to whatever the winner wants. We had an attorney ready to donate time for the paperwork. The guy refused to agree to those terms. He was up for anything but wouldn't do the legal name change. So we decided that the loser gets a tattoo of the winner's choosing. My idea was better, but I digress. So the challenge was set. 1 game the next day for the tattoo. Our studio was next to a bowling alley, so we were able to set it up so that we started in the studio in the first hour of the show, bowled in the second hour, and got the tattoo in the third hour. I designed my tattoo and got it to an artist. She made a stencil so she could tattoo fast and make for better radio. I threw the first 9 strikes in a row. He missed a spare in the first. I didn't even finish the game. I would have had somewhere between a 269 and a perfect game. He couldn't even score higher than 200. So we go and get the tattoo on this guy like 10 minutes after I embarrassed him on live radio. The tattoo is me writing Falcor. I green screened myself in the Atreyu pose and photoshopped me into the actual movie poster. The artist had a perfect stencil made. The tattoo is finished and the detail is unbelievable. We all have a great laugh and I only see this guy one other time in my life. Plot twist. The last I heard, he was in jail for graping minus the G a 13-year-old. His second grape conviction. He couldn't legally change his name because he was a registered sex offender. So there is a child grapist in prison somewhere with a tattoo of me writing Falcor on his bicep. I'm the only person in the world with that story.
That may very well be true. You may be the only person in the world with that story, but I believe the world is an incredibly large place with some overlap and reoccurring events, so maybe not. When I was around 8, I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy and some severe heart issues. Everyone kind of just assumed I would die any day after that. Well, come 8 years later, I was still here and my doctor pretty much gave up on figuring out what is wrong with me, so my parents decided to get a second opinion. We went to Mayo Clinic and I was easily diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, something that is easily treated through exercise. In my case, post varies a lot and can be much more difficult to fight for others. The opposite of what my doctors told me to do. After that, I was just like, crap, now I have to plan my future. See, this is a real plot twist, because some people in this, I swear, have taken the idea and gone, oh, my life taking a very sudden and extreme change is a plot twist. No, this is a plot twist. A good one at that.
I will try to keep this as short as possible. My grandfather left my grandmother for another man after 35 years of marriage and the raising of 2 kids, a daughter, Mom, and a slightly mentally disabled son, Drunkle. It messed my grandmother up pretty bad. Fast forward 16 years, my mom dies from liver failure. Me and my kid sister are young and broke. Grandmother is old and broke. Grandfather pays for everything. Nobody says anything to him. No thanks, no condolences, nothing. I want to go see him and talk to him, thank him, and see how he's doing. I asked my grandmother where he lives on the grounds that he told me he had something important he needed to tell me. Pulled out of my butt, obviously, but grandmother bursts into tears and confesses that grandfather is not my mom's real father. She had a whirlwind romance with some traveling jackass con man who left her as soon as he could. Grandfather offered to marry grandmother and raise my mom as his own. Mom never knew. I was stunned. My grandmother was always really judgmental of other people and looked down on anyone else in this exact situation. She was sobbing at this point, and I snapped at her to stop because blood never really played all that heavily into what me and my sister considered family that she shouldn't consider it either. Anyway, that's how I found out one of my family's biggest secrets on accident and then promptly didn't give a crap. Neat plot twist, though.
People really enjoy the phrase whirlwind romance in this topic.
TLDR, big misunderstanding leads to big love. I'll share my grandma's, one of my favorites. As a young woman, she worked at a humble bakery in a small town in Australia. American soldiers were stationed in her town as they readied for deployment in the Pacific War of World War II. One day, a soldier from New York City came in and tried to order something not on the menu. His accent was very thick and she, being a Scottish immigrant, could not understand him. She was very embarrassed, but kept trying to assist him. After a couple minutes like this, the soldier got very impatient and started cussing and insulting my grandmother, the bakery, the town, etc. Well, my grandmother, a proud woman of small stature but surprising strength, came around the counter and punched that man hard in the chest. I'm told she broke one of his ribs, but that seems extreme. She definitely knocked him over. Fellow soldier lifted the stunned soldier up the ground and back to the base where they told their CO the story. The CO panicked about ruining relations with the town and pointed to the nearest man. He asked where he was from, Illinois, and hearing no action, sent him back to the bakery to apologize on behalf of the army. The man did a wonderful job and made a good impression and went back to that town after the war, and he married my grandma, and they lived happily ever after. They eventually moved back to the States, but she refused to ever visit New York City.
Ah, Americans, never will they understand not to mess with a bonny little Scottish lady. That's a sweet story, though. TLDR, thought I was starting a new life, and I did, but not the one I thought I would. I moved from California to Chicago after a year of doing nothing after finishing school. Lived with a friend for a bit, then found an apartment in the city with some roommates. Got a perfect job in the field I went to school for. Almost 2 months to the day after I moved into the city, I went on a date that ended in me getting meningococcal meningitis. Spent 2 weeks in a coma. 2 months in a Chicago hospital, was sent back to California on a medical flight where I spent 5.5 more months in a hospital, lost 8 of my fingers and both of my legs, and now, 2.5 years later, I am still recovering with near constant setbacks. My God, went on a hot date. She presumably gave him the meningitis, not on purpose probably, but yeah, that's how you contract it, through saliva, spit, respiratory secretions and all that stuff, you know. And lost his legs, lost his fingers, just had to stay in hospital for a long time. The coma? This is a man who has suffered. This is what I'm talking about when I say to people, yeah, you can be plucked from existence or anything can happen to you at any time. Gah.
I never really knew my father growing up. Sadly, he lived right next door for most of my adolescent life. There is exactly one time I remember him acknowledging me. I was standing on my front porch and he was going up the steps and into his. I was a kid. I waved, he waved back. That is the only contact I remember with my father as a child. Still though, I've always wondered about him. It hasn't really ever been about anger or anything, but more so why he chose not to want me. I've wondered about him for over 15 years. Way back in the day, they released a bike called the Sonic 6. It was a glorified Huffy with a big blue shield on the front and a gear stick in the dead center to change gears. I got it for my birthday, and of course, I was ecstatic. That thing was so Cool. As luck would have it, as I was riding with a friend, a guy walking past me the opposite way cold-cocked me and knocked me straight off the bike. I got sucker punched like you wouldn't believe. The dude was huge, like obese huge. I was a kid. How powerful was I? The guy simply jumped on my brand new bike, told me to stay down and pedaled off. I chased him, but I didn't get very far. He was gone in a flash. 15 years later, I learned that my real father had paid that guy to beat me up and steal my bike as a revenge tactic against my mother. I mean, what kind of person does that? What kind of father does that? Sad, really. Another tad bit I wanted to throw in. I mentioned how the dude decked me and just rode off with the bike. Multiple sources had confirmed that he had actually paid the dude to beat the crap out of me. Like hit me while I'm about out for the count type of thing. The guy used to hang out with his friend right across the street. A few weeks after my bike was stolen, they started riding it up and down the street in front of me, except they had broken off the left-hand side of the handlebars. I remember the shield used to flap back and forth as they went flying down the street on it. How is that for some bullcrap?
What a despicable, vindictive individual to pay someone to beat up your son and steal his bike because you don't like the mom. What? That was their father's name? Stan Smith? Does he work for the CIA? Because that's the kind of thing that he would do. Well, maybe not actually, because Stan Smith would probably do it himself.
Fellow teachers of Reddit, what experience have you had with dumb parents? I substituted in a high school for 5 months to finish off the year for a teacher who was on maternity leave. So I had a student, high school senior, who never did any homework, accounted for 35% of the total grade. I would constantly send emails to the parents who always responded that they'd deal with it. Spoke with the parents at conferences and kept the admin in the loop. 1 week before finals, I sent the notice home that she needed to get a 97 on the final to pass the class and get the credits she needed for graduation. And I even gave her one more chance to turn in past homework for 50% credit. Fast forward to the final, she barely gets a passing grade and therefore can't get the credits, can't graduate, can't enlist in the Air Force like she had intended. The parents come into the office of the school screaming at everyone that they had no clue it would come to this. When we all sat down in the office with the guidance counselor, principal, department head, and myself, I reviewed the several notices with them, explained that she had multiple opportunities to gain credit, etc., but refused to do anything. Turns out the wife was hiding the emails and information from her husband and wanted her daughter to fail so she wouldn't join the Air Force and move away from home. Last I heard from the situation, they're not together, the daughter is working at Lowe's, never finished high school, and has 2 kids and multiple arrests for selling drugs. There's a reason I didn't want to pursue teaching as a career after that. We had a parent instigate an investigation into bullying, formal complaint, restorative meetings, etc. because her son was on the playground after school, and one of the older children wanted to get past him and said, "Excuse me, little one." She said that by not using his name, the older child didn't know it, he was bullying her son. I taught English in Colombia for a summer and had some pretty interesting interactions. One particular set of parents insisted that their son was a brilliant genius who didn't need to study. He rarely came to class and therefore could barely speak any English, while the rest of his classmates could speak full basic sentences. I emailed his parents my concerns for his apparent lack of motivation, and they told me that he could speak perfect English and didn't need to come to class, so they let him skip. Finally, parent-instructor conferences time came and I asked them to bring their son. I asked him in English, "How's English class coming along?" He stared blankly and just started crying. "Told you so." Just before Christmas break, I had the students hand in a paper. One of the students was missing a page, so I pulled out the contact sheet that I had the students fill out at the beginning of the year and gave a call. The student's father picked up the line and said, "Thanks for calling. We'll definitely get that extra page into you." The next day, the student's mother comes storming into the classroom. She happens to be an education assistant at the school. She demands to know where I got that number. I said her son had put it on the contact sheet. Apparently, the parents are separated. She proceeded to tell me that I had no right to call that number, and that when there's a problem with her son, only she has the right to know. I told her, "Thanks, that's good to know." That's when she dropped this bombshell. "If he hands in something that's incomplete, you fail him. You got that? Fail." Then she walked out of the classroom. This coming from a person who's supposed to help children succeed. I wouldn't actually call them dumb parents, but parents who are in denial about who their child actually is break my heart. For instance, we had a student who had an abundance of markers for autism and was in 6th grade. All the teachers on the student's team agreed they ought to tell the parents their concerns and suggest the student be tested so we could offer more resources for the student. The teacher who spoke with them was very polite and very kind in suggesting they try and figure out how best to help the student. And the mom literally screamed at her that nothing is wrong with her child and that she would never get the student tested. Her husband even tried to tell her that it wasn't a bad thing and they should try and see if it would help, since his teachers who knew him thought it might. The mom started cussing out the teacher and stormed out. I teach in a college, so the students are almost always 18 or over. A couple years ago, one student's mother called the chair of my department to complain on behalf of her daughter about the difficulty of some of the work listed on my syllabus. My chair was baffled and asked the mother if her daughter was over 18. The mother replied that her daughter was 20 years old. My chair explained that it was then her daughter's responsibility to either speak with me directly or withdraw from the course. That's it. That's all. It's college. People only go if they want to. No one's mother can do anything about the workload. I had a student who I caught plagiarizing in an essay. The 0 was going to cause the student to not graduate on time. The parent called a meeting, but I had proof of action thanks to turnitin.com. I explained the assignment and I showed the parent my proof, and that's when she said, "But I wrote that part of the essay, not my daughter, so she didn't cheat, I did." 4-day weekend. Come back on Monday to 50 emails. Generally, we have 10 to 15 in my group. My voicemail had 10 messages. I had not gotten a voicemail once in my entire time at my school. A parent flipping out that their student is failing. How stupid I was for not allowing their student to do the work. How ridiculous I was that I could not give her students another chance. Last email and voicemail is husband apologizing because I'm not the teacher of this student. Got confused with the last name, I guess. Had 2 girls in my English class who obviously hated each other. They would exchange glares, talk a little too loudly about each other while in the same vicinity, etc. I talked to them about it separately and they both responded with, "I hate that stupid witch." Notified admin of the situation and called the parents. Next day, they decided to fight it out in class. After breaking it up, I find out that girl number 1 was accusing the other girl of wearing, quote, butt pads to make her butt look better. After discussing it with her parents, girl number 1's mom told her that only hoes wear butt pads and that she should do something about it. The butt pad girl, girl number 2, swore she wasn't wearing butt pads and that it was all natural. After telling her parents about it, they advised her to mess up that witch for talking smack. And that is how you end up with a fight in class over butt pads instigated by parents. Taught college, so my story is nice. Had a student failing horribly, less than 10%, but would not drop. Whatever, not my dime, not my problem. Anyway, grades come in and I guess his mother has the password to his account. Or perhaps he just told her his grade, F obviously. And I get an angry email insisting that there's no way he could have failed pre-calculus. Because my God, his father's an engineer and the student wants to be an engineer and he just has to be good at math. The best part is when you turn 18 and go to college, you're treated as an adult, even if you don't act like one. And there's a little box you check that says, "Allow my parents to see my records." Most kids don't check it, and by law, I'm not allowed to release any records to anyone, even parents. So I politely informed her that her son is considered an adult and I was not allowed to release any records and that she would have to contact him. Of course, this prompted a long, "I'm going to get you fired," that I forwarded to my dean, who came to my office for a long laugh. I actually feel pretty bad for the kid. Having a helicopter mom like that at that age will do him no favors. When I was a student teacher, we were preparing for parent-teacher interviews. My cooperating teacher and the VPs had to have a discussion with me in regards to meeting with one particular parent. Basically, let my cooperating teacher do all the talking. Usually I'd be expected to take the lead as I'd been planning and teaching the course at this point for a while. Because if we say the wrong thing, it's entirely possible that the kid will be showing up to school with bruises the next day. Apparently, the administration had already been involved with this individual and police multiple times before. In the end, everything turned out okay, as far as I know. I believe the student went on to graduate that year. Still something that sticks with me as a reminder that the profession isn't just lessons and grading. There's some real stuff that goes down occasionally. The dumbest parents I have experience with are really the ones I had no experience with. I generally have about 150 students at any given quarter, and parent-teacher conferences twice a year. I never get more than 6 parents. The past quarter was my worst ever. 1 parent showed up. What bothers me even more is that I teach middle school, an age group that really doesn't want to be in school, in an inner-city district, adding even more to students' drive. A complete lack of interest in your kid's education is the dumbest thing I can think of. Not me, but from a coworker of mine. She informed a parent that her 3rd grader was struggling with multiplication and division. She suggested that the parent work with the child on these skills. The parent refused because she never learned how to multiply or divide. Therefore, it had no practical use and she didn't see the big deal. I had a 5th grader blow up on me, shouting and screaming in the hallway. This was sort of the final straw for him. He had a long history of verbal abuse of staff in the school, and he was suspended for 6 days. State law allows the parents to have an informal meeting with the teacher and the principal of the school. Mom and Dad come into this meeting with myself, the principal, and the guidance counselor. Principal introduces everyone. Mom interrupts saying she has a
major concern that needs to be addressed immediately.
She accused the principal of being an imposter and demanded that everyone in the room take out their driver's license to prove that
we are who we say we are.
We all refused and she batted about this for 10 minutes or so. Over the course of the next 45 minutes, she ranted about how the principal was an imposter and that this imposter principal, myself, and the superintendent were involved in a conspiracy to remove her son from the school. My first year of teaching, I had a student who was constantly sleeping in class. I called home about it and the mother said that he was always on his computer or watching TV at night and she couldn't get him to stop. I was only 23 at the time and didn't feel confident enough to tell a parent how to be a parent. But if that happened now, I'd calmly tell the parent to go into the room and remove the offending technology. I had a kid that was very angry, got in fights with kids and teachers and so on. I worked with this kid and we were making a lot of progress. His mom believes in not sharing your feelings and keeping things bottled up. So she told him not to talk to me about his feelings anymore. For a year, anytime I tried to talk to him, he'd say, "Mom says I don't have to talk about my feelings, so I'm not going to." And I'd patiently tell him, okay. He got progressively worse and had such a hard year that year. After he came back from summer, he came up to me and gave me a hug and told me thank you for helping him. The next year, he did amazing. I'm really happy for him. But his mom really stunted his growth with her own fears of being open and vulnerable. She never liked me in my hippie ways. I work as an assistant at an art studio and we have a 7-year-old with seizure syndrome. Except I'm pretty sure she doesn't actually have it. I think she only had 1 seizure once and her mom freaked out and had her diagnosed. Now, this little girl loved to terrorize her mother. She's told me that. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes and gigantic toothy smile and told me that she likes messing with her mom and making her angry because her mom is too protective and one of those hovercopter parents. So this little girl just jerks her mom every which way and it's hilarious because her mom is just like that. Overbearing, extremely protective, and really, really bossy. She'll tell the main teacher and I how to teach her daughter, how to draw, and how many colors to use, etc., etc., etc. But we don't have to retaliate or even say anything because her daughter does it for us. That little girl is fantastic. My uncle was a teacher in a school for troubled kids for about 10 years, elementary. One day, a kid starts talking about how the plants in Dare are all over his house. My uncle, being a longtime surfer and product of the 70s, didn't say anything at first. Then, during a parent-teacher conference, the parents are just being flat out uncooperative. It ain't my son's fault. You failing him. That on you. He do his homework. I see him. Ma'am, he needs more Nah, you don't know what you're talking about. How'd you even be a teacher when you don't know nothing? I know you're cultivating marijuana at the same home where your son lives. Boom. He said she got a look on her face that was just priceless, like she had just pooped her pants. Then he told her, get rid of the plants, today, and sit down with your son and help him with his work. Or else. My mother is a K-12 teacher for a charter school that does homeschooling with the teacher checking in and reviewing things about once a week. It's meant for students who have difficulty in the public school system, which can range from dropouts to super smart kids to non-English speakers, and parents who don't have the time to do full homeschool. I used to help with grading the math and science and stuff, so I have tons of stories. One parent during the school year kept taking her daughter on trips to different countries, and then asking my mother to extend her work. We're talking about 5 or 6 trips during the year. That would be fine if it was laid out at the start of the school year and they could schedule accordingly. But this parent would take these trips spontaneously. Like, in a few days we're going to Russia, so she can't meet you next week like we scheduled 2 days ago. Another parent really peeved off my mother. 2 kids, brothers, both seniors, almost done with high school. All that was left was some sort of state testing done in a classroom. One brother shows up, but the other isn't there. My mom, the proctor for the exam, asks where his brother is. He replies, he didn't feel like coming. She tells him that this is all he needs to graduate, so text him and get him to come here. He doesn't show. Halfway through the test, the kid's mother storms in the door, yelling at my mother, telling her off for making her son feel ashamed and humiliated. She flips a table over, no joke, grabs her son that's there, who looked like he wanted to die, keep in mind he's a senior, like 17 years old or so, and storms out of the door. Both brothers failed to get their high school degree as neither had completed the state test. The crazy mom then writes a scathing email to my mother's supervisor, talking about how she'd been lying to her, disregarding her problems and her children's education, and attempting to sabotage their chance at graduation. A 16-year-old freshman girl is constantly skipping class and starts failing at the beginning of the year. I call mother to inform her about missing class and missing grades. The mother puts me on speakerphone without telling me that the kid is listening on the conversation. I tell her that I'm concerned about the kid's attendance and seemingly poor academic habits. The mother blows up at me saying that I shouldn't worry about her attendance because it's not my business. She then says that she's self-employed and frequently far from the school and can't take the time to deal with her daughter's school issues. She later transfers out of my class to another teacher's. She failed the class anyway. My mom is a kindergarten teacher. Just a few months ago, one parent asked her if it was alright if she came in and gave the kids henna tattoos for a Christmas party. My mom decided to give the kids permission slips in order to participate and mentioned that the tattoos would be about the size of a nickel and would be holiday themed. Another parent, upon reading the permission slip, came into the school and complained to the principal that my mother was
Trying to turn the kids Muslim.
The principal essentially told her she was a moron and to screw off. Not me, but a situation that happened in my school. We get a new student the last week of May with only 4 weeks of school left. In this school year, this student has only attended 2.5 weeks of school due to school anxiety. He has a whole team of professionals, his mother, and a one-on-one aide that works with him. This is also his 3rd school, kicked out of his 2 previous ones, and he's in 2nd grade. He had a generally good first day. Fist bumped his teacher, did a little bit of stuff, then went home and told his mother that it was the worst day of his life. Mom comes to school all up in arms about how we're ruining her precious little snowflake. The next day, his classroom teacher tried to get him to do some writing with her. The kid looks straight in her eyes and says, "My mother said I don't have to do anything. Are you calling my mother a liar?" Cue mother the next day all up in arms because
The teacher called my precious snowflake a liar.
So, due to his school anxiety, he doesn't have to do any work, interact with teachers, make any movement whatsoever except sit like a lump in his seat. The teacher, when giving an assignment to the class, has to specify to him, but you don't have to do anything if you don't want to. It's by far the stupidest situation I've ever witnessed. I don't want to call any parents dumb. In my experience, they're mostly doing the best they can for their kids, even if that best isn't what we'd hope for. However, I did have a student who came to my student teaching classroom 2 grades below reading level, and similarly behind in other subjects. She really wanted to learn, but she had some cognitive issues that didn't qualify her for special ed, but meant that she required a lot of time and personal attention to learn well. For that entire school year, I worked individually with her before and after school, while she was waiting for the bus or after she'd been dropped off, and often during her recess and art/gym/library, which she asked me to do because she wanted to learn and wanted the one-on-one attention. She improved markedly in reading and writing, which is what we were concentrating on. She wasn't caught up at the end of the year, but she was a heck of a lot closer. She failed the year, but because she had a speech issue, her parents could decide to send her to the next grade anyway. I tried and tried to convince her parents that she should be held back a year, because with another year of intensive help, which I was going to find a way to secure for her, I thought that she could be close to or on grade level and could possibly keep up with the other students after that. They refused because they didn't want the other students to make fun of her. I have no idea what happened after that because I moved to another state, but I bet it wasn't good. Our AP US history teacher was going to quit teaching after this year because he'd become disillusioned with the whole routine, I guess. He didn't tell us this until right before the AP test, and luckily we reignited his love for teaching. He told us this. He's the only AP teacher who doesn't curve tests, and his tests are the hardest between the 3 AP USH teachers. So a lot of kids with his class end up losing their 4.0s. So apparently kids' parents were trying to get him fired for it or something. I thought that was pretty crazy. He's a really nice guy too. For me, someone who really dislikes history, memorization is tedious, his class ended up being my favorite class. I used to work at a daycare for kids aged 18 months to 3 years. There was this one little 3-year-old boy that used to call all the teacher stupid B words and C words. He also had extreme anger problems that led to violence towards the other kids. He would often hit, kick, spit, and choke out other kids. Despite this, he could be the absolute sweetest boy and craved being held by teachers in one-on-one time where he could get full undivided attention. We all dedicated ourselves to making sure we gave him special time to work on these issues. His dad was in jail and he would often talk about how scared he was to be put in prison and other issues at home. We discussed this with the mom and asked her to help with his anger by helping him find other ways of expressing it, as well as work on his swearing. All she said was she tries to work on his swearing, but he sees it on TV and she can't help that, and that he inherited his anger issues from his dad, who was both verbally and physically abusive towards her, hence why he was in jail. It was so frustrating to work with a woman who didn't think she could control what her 3-year-old son watched on TV and was resigned to believing her son's anger could not be controlled because of his dad. As a 3-year-old, he was mirroring actions he had seen, and she didn't understand that by teaching the child proper behavior and outlets for his anger, it would drastically improve. Once dad got out of jail, she pulled her son from school and moved to another state with the guy. I don't know if this is really dumb, but weird, I guess. I worked for a while as the assistant band director at a private high school, and one night after a football game, the director and myself were sitting in his office talking. One of the members of the band booster organization came in and closed the door and asked to talk with us. We agreed and gave him our full attention. He then explained how he had a marvelous plan that would help recruit for the band, which was to fix the election for homecoming queen. He told us that we could send mailers to every senior male, only senior males got to vote for homecoming queen, encouraging them to vote for one specific band girl, chosen by the band director of course, and also some kind of incentive such as coupons or monetary contribution. The band director and myself shared puzzled looks over his incredibly thought-out plan on how to fix the homecoming queen race. He was convinced that through this, we would raise awareness of the band program and then our numbers would skyrocket. We didn't tell him no, but we didn't tell him yes. Instead, we told him we'd think about it, and he left the office. After he left, the band director looked at me and said, "What the heck? No." I remember being 10 to 12 and having a student-led conference. It was going really well. Awesome grades, lots of friends, but I noticed a woman was being really mean to one of the teachers. And when my parents were talking to my teacher in private, part of the conference, she screamed, "My son is smarter than every kid in this room. This work is just not what he was made for. He deserves better." I went to a $30K a year private school and her son was very obviously disturbed in some way.
What's the most fitting case of vigilante justice you've ever heard of?
The man's name was Ken Rex McElroy. He terrorized a small town he lived in for years. He was accused of regularly stealing from his neighbors, stuff like livestock, gasoline, and antiques, robbery, harassing, assaulting, raping women, 2 as young as 12, destroying property, including burning down his wife's parents' house when she tried to leave him, assault, including shooting at least 2 people. He was charged with various crimes at least 3 times a year, but he had an incredible lawyer. Man was only ever charged with anything once. He used to intimidate witnesses against him by following them or parking outside their homes and watch them until they were too scared to testify against him. That one time he was charged, by the way, he shot a grocer in the neck with a scatter shooty bang bang. For that he was given a charge of 2nd-degree assault. Max 2-year sentence. But he appealed, of course, and got out on bail. So he goes into a bar and loudly threatens to murder said grocer who survived the shooting to the neck, by the way. All that did was get his trial pushed back. Anywho, the town had a meeting. Then a big group of them went to the bar where Ken liked to drink and shot him in the goddamn head.
I have actually been aware of the Kevin Rex McElroy story for a really long time. I watched Count Dankula's Mad Lads video on it, and honestly, a lot of his Mad Lads videos are so fun and interesting to watch. But this raises an interesting question of if there is a general menace to society going about doing things on repeat and the police, the justice system, what have you, aren't doing their job, should the general populace just put up with it? I mean, I should hope this isn't a controversial statement to make, but I really have zero respect, tolerance, or sympathy for rapists, murderers, or anything of that ilk, to be honest. And if an individual does come along and this person decides to fool around and find out and that person does something about it when no one else did, when the police didn't bother, when the justice system did not do what it's supposed to do, then frankly, life moves on.
Another case, Yaku Yadav. To quote the Wikipedia article, he was an Indian gangster, robber, home invader, kidnapper, serial rapist minus the G, extortionist and serial killer. He terrorized a poor slum to the point nearly every single woman in this community had been assaulted by him, and the daughters were just kept inside. He never got in trouble though because he bribed the police and only targeted Dalits. Basically, the untouchable caste in India. Seriously, the list of crimes is horrifying just skimming the article. It all came to a head when he turned his attention on a young woman who was studying to go to college and help the community. She stood up to him, and it ended with her threatening to blow up her house if they broke in. She called the police during the standoff, but they never came. That was the last straw for the neighbors. A mob formed and chased off his men by stoning them and then burning down his house, and he went to the police to get himself arrested for his own protection. When they took him to the court for trial, a mob was waiting and he actually threatened them. The police did nothing. More than that, one of his accomplices tried to pass him a knife, and the police only stepped in after the mob protested that. The next day, he was attacked and beaten, but he was rescued by the police. The police had no intention of actually punishing him and set up his bail hearing in another city. Hundreds of women marched from the slums armed with knives and chili powder, and well, I think I'll just quote the Wikipedia article. Yadav was then lynched by the mob of 200 to 400 women who showed up. He was stabbed at least 70 times and chili powder and stones were thrown in his face. The chili powder was also thrown into the faces of police officers who guarded him. The police officers, overwhelmed and terrified, fled immediately. One of his alleged victims also hacked off his penis. The lynching occurred in Nagpur District Court No. 7,
on the marble floor of the courtroom. As he was being lynched, Yadav was horrified and shouted, "Forgive me. I won't do it again." The women passed their knives around and kept stabbing him. Each woman agreed to stab Yadav at least once. The mob continued attacking his corpse post-mortem. Yep, one of the most brutal lynchings ever. If you think it wasn't justified, I'll quote one more part from the Wikipedia article about his arrival at the court, which I think sums up his character quite well. Yadav walked in and was confident and unrepentant. At about 2:30 to 3 p.m. when Yadav appeared, he saw a woman he had assaulted. Yadav mocked her, called her a prostitute, and said he would do it to her again. The police laughed. Even when faced with a mob of his victims, he was still mocking them. This monster only felt remorse when he was literally about to die. And worse, the police laughed. If that mob had any lingering doubts, that moment definitely 100% made it clear that the police would not do anything to ever see Yadav face actual justice. 100% justified vigilante justice at its finest. I'm not a man of faith. I have limited understanding of Hinduism, but I hope this man is suffering in Naraka for all eternity. And before you say Naraka is not a place of permanence for sinners, Madhvacharya has a different opinion on that. But here's the thing, it's not even just a problem with Aku Yadav himself. Screw that guy to the deepest depths of Naraka, or the police, or any of his associates. It's also the freaking caste system, which is surprisingly still pretty prevalent in their society today. I mean, this guy died in 2004. Grady Stiles Jr., aka Lobster Boy. He was an incredibly abusive husband and father. His daughter and her boyfriend actually pretended she was pregnant so they could get married and she could leave the house. The day before the wedding, he shot the boyfriend in the back 3 times, killing him. He actually confessed at the trial and was found guilty of 3rd-degree murder. However, the jail wasn't equipped to deal with his condition. He required a wheelchair due to his condition, and so he was instead sentenced to 15 years probation. He went back to being an abusive monster to his family, but it was even worse than before. He regularly reminded them he got away with murder once and he could do it again. Somehow, he convinced his first wife to remarry him during this time, which I'd say was the worst mistake she ever made. In the end, his stepson and possibly his wife, though they all claim she had nothing to do with it, hired a fellow circus performer to murder him because his entire family believed he would murder her. I'm not exaggerating. In interviews for the ID show I saw about the case, every family member made it clear that if he lived, he most likely would have killed her at some point. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. His death is one of the only murders outside of self-defense that I think is 100% justified, because the justice system already failed once. He might have been sentenced and found guilty, but they just put him on probation and house arrest. He literally got away with murder. If he'd just gone to jail the first time, then his family wouldn't be so screwed up now. I feel so bad for the stepson. He just wanted to protect his mom, and now he'll be in jail for the rest of his life. I think that's one of the worst parts of this case. His wife, stepson, and the hired killer all got longer sentences than Stiles' probation. That man never spent a day in jail for cold-blooded murder, and yet his wife and stepson are likely to rot in there for trying to protect themselves from him. I'm going to say this hits very close to home, so I'm going to make this brief. Lobster Boy, you're a despicable piece of crap. I'd call you something else, but I'm not allowed to, or else I'll get a smack on the bum-bum by the producers.
In my hometown, we had a drunk named T. He was in his 60s when this happened. T was slightly mentally handicapped and always walked home from the bar. One night, a group of teenagers grabbed him and beat him with a crowbar. Miraculously, T lived. Once the names got out of who did the crime, they all got out because they were 16 with probation. A group of guys, most of them over 6 foot and big, found the boys one by one and beat the living tar out of them. Then many of us in town donated and paid all T's medical bills off, and the money raised paid for him to live in a nice apartment the rest of his life. So I understand to some degree why young children and teenagers are defended or protected from the consequences of their own actions by the law, but in this case, beating a man with a crowbar in the street is nothing but savagery. Screw them kids. Otherwise, though, I'm glad that this actually had a happy ending rather than just getting revenge, because revenge is cool. Revenge is rad. Don't let The Last of Us 2 tell you otherwise. Revenge is the sickest thing you can ever achieve. I'm joking. Hands up anybody who has heard of the Derlavanga Brigade.
This was a Nazi unit recruited from convicts and guys released from asylums and was so brutal that even other Nazis were disgusted by their atrocities. Their particular forte was massacring defenseless Slavic civilians, including murdering an entire kindergarten full of kids with bayonets. Evil Schweißkerl, to say the least. Their leader was a convicted rapist, sadist, and all-round unstable thug, Oskar Derlewanger. After the war, he was captured by the French and imprisoned where he reportedly died of war wounds. What is more likely is that some payback happened. Remember how Derlewanger loved slaughtering Slavs? Derlewanger's guards happened to be Polish. I suspect this choice of guards was entirely deliberate. The result was that Derlewanger got beaten to death.
I have nothing to say except they are an actual factual Nazi and I don't really care or feel bad about anything that happens to them.
This is nowhere near the severity of most of these stories, but since it was close to home, when my daughter was in high school, she was tall and very attractive. She got a lot of attention from boys. One in particular was a jerk. Scott would not leave or take no for an answer. He would harass her because she had no interest in him. But she is very independent and never complained to us. She has always taken care of her own business. One day between classes, she stopped to get a drink of water. She stood there for a minute chatting with her friends, and Scott, showing off for his idiot pals, slid on his back behind my daughter so he could take a look up her dress. When my daughter looked down, Scott starts saying something like, "She's wearing pretty pink panties today." My daughter, a star on the soccer team, kicked Scott very hard in the ribs. That evening I get a call from a man I have met, Scott's dad. They are in the ER. Scott has 2 broken ribs. I had no idea how this related to me. Then he told me that Scott told me that my daughter did this to him. I was expecting him to say he was going to sue me or something, but what he said was, I questioned Scott as to what he did to get kicked and how he was in such a position. I found out why your daughter kicked him, and she should have kicked him a few more times. I will have him apologize in writing, and furthermore, he will be grounded, I say grounded, until the end of school. But if you will, apologize to your daughter for me. Of course, my wife and I had a talk with her, relayed the message, and told her not to withhold good news. I have a lot of respect for a dad who did the right thing. I would bet that Scott turned out to be a better man.
I certainly hope so as well that Scott turned out to be a better person. I know quite a few people who gave people, and even myself, a lot of crap in high school, and there'd be fights, insults would be tossed about and whatnot. And as a matter of fact, one of them that I know who I really, really disliked for a long time, was a snotty little brat for most of his life, has actually grown up to be a fairly respectable individual. TLDR, father gets ultimate revenge on a pedophile who'd raped his son and got away with it in court. Sorry this is long, but it requires an intro of some sort. Years ago, I remember my family watching Phil Donahue. Y'all remember him, right? He kind of set the standard for talk shows and doing it in an investigative manner. But he had standards and wouldn't allow a Jerry Springer-like atmosphere. He'd present something or someone with controversial ideas or ideologies, or have people famous because this or that happened, or the subject of sensationalist news stories, human interest stories, all sorts of things that he thoroughly educated people about. Then he'd let his audience have the floor to ask questions freely. Anyway, one episode was a man about 40s or so. He'd just been, I think, either acquitted or done some time. I don't remember that part. But he had a son that was raped by a pedophile, and his son had been forced to testify in court at maybe age 9 or 10 and had to give extremely horrible and graphic testimony retelling of what the man had done to him, to the point he got sick on the stand and began vomiting. It was obviously horrendous to have been forced to watch, being the boy's father and mother. Well, the pedo got a not guilty verdict for a lack of physical evidence, regardless of what the little boy had said on the stand, something that happens all too often. So the father, who was a religious man, and I think they were from Texas, if I'm not mistaken, broke into the pedo's home and basically, I guess, held him at shooty bang bang point and told him, "You and I are going to pray." He told the pedophile, "Yes, you and I are going to pray."
You are going to ask God for forgiveness for what you did to my son, and I am going to ask him for forgiveness for what I am about to do to you. And blew his brains out. I was not very old myself, maybe 12 when I saw that episode, and it totally galvanized me, and I loved that show till it went off the air. Hoo-wee!
You're gonna ask God for forgiveness, and I'm gonna ask him to forgive me for what I'm about to do to you.
That is some action movie stuff, man. Say what you want about Texas, say what you want about Texan boys, but, oh man, when they want revenge, they get it. In Brazil, I have a resident for 2+ years. It is a common practice to cut off the fingers and hands of captured thieves. A lot of the time they will also get beaten, almost to death with planks, like 2x4s, etc. It is also common for them to take a bullet to the hand, leg, etc. Rapists, thieves, and others who are shunned are usually subject to this kind of torture. Many times they will be dismembered with a machete or disemboweled as well. Beheadings are common, but they will usually take place after the victim has went through some significant torture. I have personally seen an alleged rapist from Sao Paulo get captured by the victim's brother. The rapist was about 20 or so. The girl he raped was about 11. They caught him, beat him in the street, then took him in an alley and hacked him up with a machete.
It really isn't hard, people. Just keep your dirty little hands to yourself.
I arrived to install some security and surveillance devices at a home in Phoenix several years ago and got the story straight from Brian Danielson. For those of you, like I was, that have no idea who this is, he goes by the stage name of Daniel Bryan and is/was a wrestler with the WWE and a one-time champion. I'll link the story, but it seems to have left out some of the best details that were relayed to me. Story goes that he and his wife arrive home. His wife goes to the carport door to enter the house and locks eyes with someone in the house. She sees the man and another drop whatever they are holding and bolt out of the back door towards the alley that runs behind the house. Brian takes off running after them, vaults the fence in the backyard and sees the two men running in the opposite direction away from the house. He decides to chase one guy over the other. Not sure what helped decide that. He chases the guy for about a block as the guy had a good lead on him. He catches the guy in the front of someone's house and puts him in a headlock and holds him while the homeowner that witnesses the struggle calls 911. The police were quick to arrive as another homeowner had already called about the suspicious vehicle parked at the end of the alley that happened to belong to the would-be burglars. Even more impressive about this is that Brian had very recently undergone neck surgery and was still capable of chasing down and subduing someone intent on getting away. Pro wrestling may be scripted, but this dude was obviously more than capable of handling himself. Also, he and his wife, Brie Bella, were some of the nicest and down-to-earth celebrities that I have met in my line of work.
It's not hard, people. Just keep your sticky little fingers to your goddamn self. But anyway, this actually reminds me of the story about Dolph Lundgren. Apparently, supposedly, his Marbella home was being robbed by 3 different people. And for those of you who don't know who Dolph Lundgren is, Rocky IV, Ivan Drago, man was built different. Like I said, I'm not a man of faith or anything like that, but if God is real, he built Dolph Lundgren with the good stuff. Some people out there are just built female dog made. I can't say that word, so female dog made, but Dolph Lundgren is built different. So these 3 masked robbers are apparently robbing his house in Marbella or something. They've tied up his wife, but then upon seeing a family portrait and seeing that Dolph Lundgren is in said family portrait, suddenly fear for their lives, because what if Dolph Lundgren comes home? Oh man, don't say that, screw this. And they leave. They just drop everything and just leave immediately. And honestly, I don't blame them.
A man's son was abducted by his karate teacher and raped over quite a long period of time. The police caught him, and as they were bringing him through the airport, his father pretended to be on a payphone. When the rapist and police walked by, he turned around and shot the rapist in the head, killing him instantly. This was all caught live on the news. The father wasn't charged with murder. He received 5 years probation. Gary frickin' Plauché. I love this story. It's a horrible story. It's a horrible story when you get down to it because of the victimization of his son. And you see, the context behind it is that the karate instructor of the son was kind of sort of friends with the family to some degree, like they were on good terms, and then suddenly the kidnapping happened. He flew across the freaking country and stuff to get away, I think.
And I think to a very large degree, Gary felt responsible for not being able to protect his son from this guy. So he took actions into his own hands and killed him. But his son actually made a really nice post about his father not too long ago. I remember liking and retweeting it. It went something along the lines of, a lot of people know his father for this thing, obviously, but here's what I knew my father as. He was a kind, gentle man, and there was like a nice picture of him painting Easter eggs and stuff, I think. Rest in power, Gary, that's all I gotta say. Rest in frickin' power. I mean, you just did what any decent father would do if they found out something like that had happened to their child.
Marvin Heemeyer, a.k.a. Killdozer. I linked the wiki for him, but he is an absolute legend. I will summarize what he did and why he did that. Be careful what you read about him, because not all of it is true. So Marvin owned a muffler repair shop. The town wanted to build a concrete factory. They offered him a very low amount of money for his property. He denied. He basically asked for $1 million. His only source of income was the shop, and if he lost it, he would be out of a job. They end up not buying his shop and building it right outside of his shop. In fact, it blocked the way he got from his house to his shop. Cue zoning disputes. He petitioned to no avail to get them to move it. Multiple times, may I add. Many other things added to his rampage. He was fined for many things from the city council, likely as revenge. In fact, they expected him to pay $80,000 to connect his shop to a sewer line that was too far away. After the factory was built, it was impossible for him to even connect it. The rampage. You have to know he did not kill anyone besides himself. He actually stopped in front of the buildings that had people in them to let them out. Some people claimed that he fired at police, but it was known he fired at propane tanks. He had a list of buildings to destroy, and he destroyed all of them. There was a local Catholic church and names of people who wronged him. We don't know if he planned to kill these people or why the church was there. In fact, he believed God willed him to do what he did, and that was the reason he wasn't given a wife or children, so he could do it without remorse for them. His tank was a bulldozer that he suited with armor, a foot thick in some places. He used metal and concrete using his welding skills to hold it together. He made 2 shooting holes, and it was resistant to explosions and small arms fire. In the end, after it stopped moving, he deleted himself with a shot in the head. It was estimated he did around $10 million worth of damage. Now, if you believe what he did was wrong, that is your opinion. The police didn't help him. The city council didn't help him. The mayor didn't. No one did. He took it into his own hands, which is what vigilante justice is. Killdozer.
I freaking love the Killdozer story. Another Mad Lad story from Count Dankula that people must watch. It is insane. This man was pushed to the utter limits by crap-eating bureaucrats. God, I hate bureaucrats.
When did your "something is very wrong here" feeling turn out to be true? A few years ago, about 1 a.m. Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I live in a rough neighborhood and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the apartment building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were 3 people whom I quickly identified as male. Right away, my reaction is to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up, and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection, I see 2 of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they're headed home after a night of heavy partying and they're just helping their friend get sick or something. I'm telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought that was odd and no good, so I dragged my dog straight back to the building. I don't know if he even got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed and think nothing more of it, until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening, because a dead body had been found. So this wasn't a friend of theirs after all. They were ditching a body. Still upsets me to this day, and I will never ignore my intuition again. A storm was gathering as my dad was driving. I was 8, sitting in the back and looking out the window. I told him, "You better hurry, that construction crane looks like it might topple." Everybody laughed at the idiot kid. That evening, the whole family was watching the local news. They opened with that crane crashing down due to heavy wind. Although nobody had been hurt, I felt vindicated. I heard a strange noise when I woke up. I looked outside my bedroom window to see if anything there had made that noise, and saw my oldest cat sitting on the windowsill outside of the other bedroom. She was staring into the room as if there was something in there that she did not like at all but could not look away. At that moment, I knew there was something or someone in the other room. Then I heard the noise again. It was like a soft squeaking, like someone shifting his weight from one foot to the other on wooden floor. I don't have wooden floors. I told myself there could not be an intruder in that room. It makes no sense that someone could get in there without waking me up, and I gathered my courage and went to check it. When I got to the doorway, I saw 2 of my other cats in the hallway staring into the room, very agitated. I peeked around the corner and heard the squeaky noise again. It was one of my neighbor's cats, very afraid and being trapped on my desk by my cats. I grew up in a fairly quiet neighborhood, and when I was 12, we got our first dog. It was my job to take him for a walk every evening after dinner. This dog was the goofiest, sweetest golden retriever mix. Not a mean bone in his body. He never met a stranger, and when he would occasionally escape, we usually found him in a neighbor's yard playing with some kids. He was the farthest thing from a guard dog you can imagine. So I'm walking him one night after dinner by myself, and suddenly he stops dead in his tracks in the very middle of the sidewalk. Out of the trees lining the neighborhood, maybe 10 feet away from me, this guy just comes strolling on out. I was pretty skittish at that age, and I didn't like being alone with strange men, like at all. So I was immediately unnerved. The guy walked up to me and asked if my dog was friendly. I responded out of sheer anxious panic and said that yeah, he was. The guy reached out to pet him, though my dog snarled and snapped at his hand, which I had never seen him do before. I apologized, made some excuse I don't remember, and hurried away under the pretense of getting my vicious dog away from him. Turns out this dude was a predator who assaulted 3 other neighborhood kids in those trees, and my dog was probably the only reason I wasn't the 4th. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 a.m. and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially, we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday night. But as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her, and her clutch was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it, we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions. What bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa U student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all the same seemed really uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took out her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational while the other was silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she'd been dosed and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff. All the praise in the world to these 2 guys. Seriously, you guys are heroes. Too many people would have just taken it at face value and walked away, but you sensed something was wrong and followed through, and as a result protected this girl from a horrible experience. Got off the subway at night. There was one other person about a half a block behind me on my route home. This is a totally normal thing. Has happened thousands of times. Totally normal looking dude. Not even following me closely. I had a bad feeling. Such a bad feeling that when I turned the corner on my way home, I broke into a dead sprint and hid behind a dumpster in the shadows partway down the street. By the time he came around the corner, I was well hidden and could see him from my hiding place. As soon as I saw his reaction to the fact that I wasn't wasn't there, I knew I'd been right to hide. He started looking for me, muttering to himself. He went up and down the street, looking around corners. I hid and held my breath until he was gone. It was terrifying. I'm so glad I had that sudden, inexplicable impulse to hide and listen to it. This is another one of those times, guys. If your spider sense starts tingling, listen to it. My friends and I went on a booze run one night back in college. We live in Flint and we were at a friend's house in a relatively bad neighborhood. We had our friend who was 21 go in while the rest of us waited. As we're sitting in the parking lot, we notice a dude standing by the trunk of his car a few rows of parking spots ahead of us. I had a bad feeling about him, so I was watching him the entire time while my friends were all chatting it up and laughing. I noticed my other friend who was driving watching too. Sure enough, after watching us for a second, he pops the trunk, pulls out a pistol and starts walking towards us. We noped out of there and floored it around the parking lot right as our friend came outside, yelled for him to get in and sped off. Turns out there had been a ton of carjackings in that area over the last few months. Not me, but my mom. When I was about 10 years old, I got invited to spend the night at my really good friend's home. My mom said no. I begged her to let me go, but she was adamant that I couldn't. She said that she just didn't feel right about it and that no amount of pleading was going to change her mind. A few weeks later, my friend's dad was arrested for possession of illegal explicit material. After he went to trial, it was found that he had abused several young girls. He would have his daughter invite them over for a slumber party and then prey on them when they went to sleep. If my mom hadn't trusted her gut feeling, I could have been one of his victims. Several years ago on Thanksgiving, my mom was becoming extremely overwhelmed. The holidays have never been a great success in my family, and my parents had issues communicating, which led to a lot of stressful, intense dinners. And if it wasn't them, it was someone else starting a fire. Well, this year was bad. My mom had been cooking for hours to get ready to head over to my cousin's house. My dad was yelling about how we spend too much money on the holidays. It got to a point where my mom told me and my brothers to leave for the party ahead of them. We didn't get far from the house until a really bad feeling started sinking in my stomach. I knew my brothers felt something too. I said, "Can we go back?" And my older brother turned around immediately. When we got there, my father was gone. He had left out of anger and my mom yelled at him to leave. My mother was in her bed, laying still with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her. She was still conscious when we came in, but started shaking and was falling asleep. We called 911. I later learned that the pills she had taken would only have put her to sleep for a long time, not actually kill her, but clearly it was her intent. She's had severe depression, and after this, she got some real help. A little different perhaps, but I used to work for a company making barns. We were installing a rail made from old oil lines. I was using a large chop saw to cut the threaded ends off the pipe. A chop saw is basically a large gas-powered chainsaw with a 14-inch diameter fiber blade in this case. I'd gotten to the last cut, and as I stood up, I had the weirdest feeling that something was wrong. Didn't know what, but I knew something was off. I looked around and checked my cut, which was good. Didn't mark the concrete below. Stood there for a solid 5 minutes with saw in my hands, trying to figure out what was wrong. All looked good until I moved the saw enough to notice a large hole burning in the shin of my jeans. Turns out I had stood in the sparks. Luckily, there was enough left for shorts. Oh, that's a close one. This one definitely could have ended a lot worse. I don't know if I had a something is very wrong feeling for this. However, I felt something was off. I was at my mechanic getting routine work done on my car during summertime. I noticed that he had a coat hanger and every single hanger had a well-worn coat on it. I thought it was odd and out of place, but figured it's a mechanic shop. They probably just leave it there from the wintertime. No biggie. Not too long afterwards, maybe a few months, there was a drug bust at the shop. They were using those jackets to hold heroin. Our mechanic is in jail now, and honestly, he was a good mechanic, so I was disappointed. Ironically, my pediatric doctor got busted for bribery to prescribe certain medications and is likely going to jail too. Never had a vibe out of him though. This sucks too, since he was a great doctor. When I was younger, we would go visit my aunt a lot. Her brother-in-law was often there and sometimes watched her kids for her. Well, me and my sister just really didn't like him. We told our mom he made us uncomfortable and that we didn't want to be around him, even though he never did or said anything bad to us. Sometime later, it was discovered that not only was he abusing his teenage daughter, but he and his girlfriend were also abusing my infant cousin and taking photos of it. He's in jail now for a very, very long time. When I was in high school, I had gone to a party with some friends. From the moment we got there, something felt off. I bugged my friends to leave and tried to explain that something just felt off. Well, I was able to bug them for all of us to leave by bribing them with some steak and shake. We found out the next day that a bunch of police came about 15 minutes after we left and arrested most of the kids as well as a group of guys who were caught abusing a girl while she was passed out drunk. So glad we got the F out of there. I was walking with my daughter last week and we heard a siren as we approached a crowded intersection. Instead of stepping close to the edge of the street and waiting for the walk light like usual, my daughter stopped well back on the edge of the grass and touched my arm so I would do the same. A full 30 seconds later, a police car came screeching through the traffic and drove onto the sidewalk to get around cars stopped at the light. If we had been in the customary pedestrian waiting spot, I don't know if he would have seen us, and I'm sure he wouldn't have been able to stop. I asked my daughter why she'd stopped so far back, and she said, "I don't know, I just knew we should." Smart kid. Not me, but my mom. And I'm doing my best to recall the story she mentioned to me a few months ago. My mom has been a psych nurse for over 30 years at a private hospital. One of the patients she was looking after was a very boisterous person in her 40s, and she had been in the hospital for over a week. One night, Mom noticed this lady was very lethargic, saying that she was just feeling tired and was going to have an early night and to get her meds early. This isn't going where you expect. Mom thinks this is very odd for this lady, but everyone has off days, and so she gives this lady her medication and she goes off to bed. About 5 minutes pass and Mom still has a knot in her gut about this lady and thinks she'll just check on her stats. So she goes to her room where the lady is just about to lay down and checks her blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen saturation. This is pretty rarely done in a psych hospital unless people have other health concerns needing monitoring. This lady's oxygen saturation was down to around 80%, I believe. To put it in perspective, if it falls below 92%, your cells can't absorb oxygen, and this can cause permanent damage. Mom, in her over 40 years of nursing, has never seen someone with such a low level. She checks again and the same result. Mom calls an ambulance and gets this lady on oxygen. Later that night, Mom gets a call from the hospital the patient was sent to from the doctor, who lets my mom know the lady's fine. She had a blood clot. If she had been left for another 15 minutes, the doctor is certain she would have died. The lady made a full recovery and gave Mom a beautiful scarf the next time she saw her. I have two. First, when I was 5, my late grandma was staying with us. One night, I woke up to some noise and found my parents and grandma up. She told me to be quiet and I realized that there was someone trying to pick the lock on our flat's door. While this is happening, my father was loading his shotgun and telling my mother and us to keep away from the door. He opened the door suddenly and tried to hit the guy with the stock of the shotgun. He started to run and my father after him, but he got away. Later that night, I learned that my grandma couldn't fall asleep, feeling there was something wrong, and then heard what was going on at the door and woke my parents. And when I was in high school, she had a stroke and lost the ability to speak. Because she was illiterate, it was hard for us to understand what she was trying to say. One day, I went to school after preparing her breakfast as usual. When I arrived, there was this urge telling me to go back home. I tried to pass it as boredom, but it got to a point where I felt very agitated and told my friends I'm going back home and left. When I was walking back home, I found my grandma wandering around without anyone. I asked her what she's doing. She pointed out like she's out for a walk, but I knew back then she couldn't find her way back without anyone because of her stroke. So I walked with her for a while and we returned back to the house to very worried parents. This was before cell phones. I've never believed in the supernatural. I'm not a religious person, but I experienced this. I don't know what to call it. My oldest daughter stopped by my work one day and introduced me to her new boyfriend. He seemed a little off to me, but I decided it was just guy dating my daughter and let it go. Later, he met my wife and I, and she told me later that he seemed off to her too. She has pretty good instincts about people, so we decided to investigate him a bit. Typing his whole name into Google, the first result was a mugshot from a couple of years ago. The third was an active warrant. More searching resulted in finding 3 warrants from different counties felonies, an extensive record, checked deception, theft, driving while suspended, driving after a lifetime suspension, and driving while a habitual traffic offender, and a brand new marriage license for him and my daughter. They were going to get married later that week. We of course told her about him, but she insisted that he had already told her about all that and had taken care of it. We emailed links to her roommate who showed her, but she didn't have any luck talking her out of the relationship. They were in love and everything would work out okay in the end. We sent in an anonymous tip and he was arrested the next day at her apartment. My daughter then found out he'd been lying to her about pretty much everything. He had entangled her in a business he was trying to start that mostly involved her financing things for him, since his credit was trash due to records for bounced checks and theft. She's still working to untangle herself from that. He's still in jail and, according to her lawyer, will be for at least 2 years depending on what happens in 2 other counties. Thank God the parents followed through on their instinct on this one. Apparently, there was already some damage done, but it would have been so much worse if they didn't do anything. I had a math teacher in middle school who came off as creepy. He would try and get close to us guys and try and act like old friends. He seemed afraid of girls for some reason. I didn't like him. He gave me a very bad feeling. After about a year at our school, he wasn't there suddenly. We had a police officer come in and sit us down and interview everyone individually. It turns out he was caught having an inappropriate themed party with some of his former male students from his previous school. He was sent to prison. I got to the airport early and got something to eat at the restaurant, boarded the plane, and everyone is on and I suddenly get a feeling of panic. Nothing else, just panic. I was used to traveling 3/4 of the month back and forth every week, so no problems flying. But in this case, I had to get off that plane. I grabbed my stuff, ran past the flight attendant and said, "Don't wait for me, I'll get another flight," and sat down trying to calm down. An announcement comes over the speaker that they're looking for me and my flight is leaving. It leaves. I watched the flight start to take off. This was in Detroit, by the way. Then it happened. The worst cramps I ever had. Ran to the bathroom. Food poisoning from the restaurant. I would have been on a 2-hour flight, stinking up the plane while ejecting the contents of my stomach from both ends. I'm sure the entire passenger compartment thanks me, though they don't know. When I was a little kid, I stepped outside to walk home from my neighbors 2 doors over. I smelled what I knew was a bear, which are common where I live. If you've ever smelled a black bear, it's not that different from a skunk, which is what my friend's mom told me it probably was when I asked her to drive me home, even though my house was literally right around the corner. The thing is, a skunk's smell is strong, but it doesn't travel. A bear's smell is more permeating. Begrudgingly, she drove me only to see the bear sitting on my back steps outside the door I would have tried to enter my house with. Black bears aren't that vicious, but my friend's mom apologized immediately about not believing me. Could have walked straight into that thing at the age of 12. When I was doing my PhD, I got offered the chance to do a Central European University summer school program to do a course that would have been extremely valuable. I even got offered a full scholarship to do the course, and free accommodation, etc. A really amazing deal. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, I said to my boyfriend at the time that something's telling me I shouldn't go. And I was like, WTF, brain? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. But the don't go feeling just kept getting stronger. So I withdrew from the course, feeling stupid for doing it. The day after I was scheduled to leave, my perfectly healthy mom got sick. A week later, she was in a coma. A week later, we had to turn off life support. Her funeral was a week after that. I would have been away in her last waking moments. I knew some people who were really into off-roading in modified Jeeps. Once, they were invited by a group of people I did not know to go up a mountain in Colorado. They chose not to go, and everyone in the 4 Jeeps that went got caught in an avalanche and died. At a research institute, I walked into a mouse procedure surgery room for a quick moment to grab something and leave. After walking out, I felt, well, to be honest, like I was a little high. There were 3 other people in that room, including 2 undergraduates, so I got worried and went back inside to check things out. When I got back inside, I asked if they were feeling okay. One of the undergrads turned to me and said she was fine, but was flushed and looked a little out of it. So I went around to all the isoflurane chambers, an odorless volatile liquid liquid that KOs mammals at low doses and kills them at higher, looking for leaks. Sure enough, the gasket at the bottom of one of the chambers had failed and it was leaking out and immediately boiling into gas and filling the room. I told them that their isoflurane was leaking, and the postdoc told me they were fine and that he uses that machine all the time. He also pointed out that the isoflurane was in an air curtain biosafety cabinet, and so even with the leak, they were protected. I called him an idiot because a biosafety cabinet recirculates air and doesn't evacuate it like a fume hood, which is what he should have been using. So I ignored him, propped open the door, and ordered the undergrads to get out of the room. I then went to their lab manager and told her what I had found. Their lab manager came down like the wrath of God.
To anyone who has ordered a mail order bride, what was it like and what happened? My friend Richard has a mail order bride from the Philippines. He's a scruffy redneck long-haul trucker from West Virginia. She's tiny, slender, and 10 years his junior. At first, she cooked, cleaned, and kept his bed warm, but after a few years, she told him she wanted an education. He put in a ton of overtime and saved up enough to put her through college. She's a physician's assistant now and makes more money than he ever has. But she still makes him dinner and makes a point of always being waiting at the door when he gets back from a long haul. They've been together for 20 years now, and it's a joy to see them together. So on paper, I don't really like the idea of mail order bride stuff. I don't really like the idea of any opening of a market that relies solely on a specific demographic, like women and stuff like that. Take the thing with surrogacy nowadays, where like a woman will have a baby for someone else to have a child. And I believe someone proposed that women in vegetative states should be used to be a repository for other people's children. And that just sounds like some horrible dystopian world. But I digress. This actually sounds like a nice, mutually beneficial relationship. He paid for her to come to the country and everything. He gives her a place to stay. He works, she cooks, she cleans. And then she said, I want an education. And he respects her enough that he's like, yes, I will pay for you to have an education. You can do what you want. That just sounds nice, not gonna lie. This doesn't sound bad at all. But I am 100% certain that things are gonna get messed up as I read through these stories. One of my uncles, who is Filipino, convinced one of his white co-workers to marry his 28-year-old niece who was still living in the Philippines at the time. The guy was at least 20 years older than her. The relationship was really rocky the first 2 years. She hated him, basically, but she stuck with the relationship, got him to go to church, and they were more or less together. About 10 years into the marriage, the guy needed a kidney transplant. Months pass, he can't work anymore, and she's spending all her free time outside of working taking care of him at the hospital while he's waiting for a kidney. I visited one time while she was in the hospital, and she broke down telling my other relatives and me how she loved him and she didn't want to lose him. The doctors finally give him like less than 3 months to live if he doesn't get a kidney, and after a month and a half later, he got the kidney, recovered, and went back to work within a year's time. At a family get-together, he bragged to everyone, including me, about how amazing he feels and how much he thought he was dead and that he was blessed to have a new lease on life. Then, a few months later, I get a call from him saying that he's met someone online and he still considers me family. In shock, I tell him I'm busy and then called my aunt, who then explained to me he found a 21-year-old single Filipina mom from Cebu and already filed divorce papers against my uncle's niece, who was almost 40 at the time. I'm weirdly reminded of Captain Hook in the classic The Good Peter Pan by Disney, where he's, oh, Smee, the way of a man with a maid, taking the best years of her life, and then casting her aside like an old glove. I went to a college course, and one of the other students was a pretty obvious mail-order bride. She was Thai, and the more we got to know her, the more she shared about the relationship. She was late 20s, and he was at the lower end of 60. He didn't work, but he received some big work compensation payouts and was apparently quite wealthy because of that. She told us they met online on one of those meet Thai ladies who were just dying to be your girlfriend kind of sites, and after talking for all of 2 weeks, they agreed to marry. This country's a little bit stricter about those sorts of unions, so there were some hoops they had to jump through, such as he had to go to visit her for a certain amount of time in Thailand before starting the process. But essentially, they were engaged after a few weeks and married within a few months.
Well, essentially one of those stereotypical Asian marriages where the wife was subservient and existed to please their husband. She would tell us he would make her wait till he was done to eat, and he would only let her eat ladylike foods like salad. He paid her a monthly salary, which was pretty abysmal, and she had to use that for clothing and other essentials. He also wouldn't let her go anywhere by herself and would drop her off and turn up an hour before classes ended in case we got let out early to drive her home. I remember we had to do a group assessment, and I had given her my phone number, and he forced her to delete it. I'm a female. I think the saddest part was when she asked a bunch of us if we could get birth control pills for her because her husband kept destroying her scripts/pills, and you could tell she was absolutely terrified of getting pregnant. The weird thing, though, was that she wasn't terribly bad off in Thailand. Her family was apparently quite wealthy, and she had her own home and stuff over there, but for whatever reason, she didn't want to live there. Personally, I would have ran the second I saw that purple-faced blob of a husband.
See, this is the situation I normally expect to come from this, but I'm not going to be surprised when, it's the other way around. My dad had one a few years back. He met her online and flew out to get her after a while. She was shut in and was legitimately afraid of me because she thought I was smoking pot. Funny thing was that I had never smoked pot at the time. I was 17. It was a weird dynamic. If I was home, she stayed in her room, unless I'd been in my room for an extended period and she deemed it safe to get food from the kitchen. My room was in the basement, just for clarification. The few times we crossed paths, she would see me, gasp, and then run to her room. My dad never saw this as a problem. He basically catered to her every want and need. Also, I should mention, he was 56 and she was 29. A year later, I moved out. Since then, she has attacked him on 2 occasions and had him arrested. Eventually, he sent her back, or maybe she left. I don't know. I no longer speak to my father, so that's the extent of my knowledge.
I agree with this too. That is such a weird dynamic to have with an individual that lives in your home, man. Imagine that, you walking through the hall. Oh, hey, lady who is presumably banging my parental figure. How are you? Ah! Runs into a frickin' room.
Although my parents were always too ashamed to admit this to anyone but myself and my sister, my mom was a mail-order bride about 23 to 24 years ago. This was before all of the online companies that do this, so my father had to find my mother in a sort of magazine catalog of Filipino women. He sent her letters and she replied. Over the course of a year, they finally met and my mom moved to my dad's tiny hometown. They got married and they had 2 daughters together, one being myself. They were both looking for a better life and someone who would treat them better than past partners had, and they both got that. Plus, it turns out they both have the travel bug, so now they're retired, living a nomadic life traveling the globe, and they got more than they've ever hoped for. Sure, I've always known there were some serious cultural differences between my parents that they've never been able to fully reconcile with. My mom, being from a very traditional village in northern Philippines, had a hard time understanding a lot of North American norms and beliefs, and they butt heads over a lot of small things. These cultural clashes have taught me so much though, and their collective love and travel and culture has inspired me to study anthropology and travel around the globe. I can't imagine having lived in a home where we didn't eat bacon, rice, pancit, and steak or purple ube birthday cakes on a regular basis. TLDR, my mom was a mail-order bride resulting in a long-term happy marriage between my parents and purple birthday cake for me.
Purple birthday cake sounds pretty rad, and I gotta say, out of all the ways you can get a mail-order bride, the fact that this guy had to do it without the use of the internet or something is, in a way, only in a way, a little bit respectable. The fact that he had to send actual letters and then wait for those letters to be delivered and then wait for a reply back, and I don't know, the patience this man must have had.
I know a guy who married a Russian gal, supposedly not quite mail order, but someone he'd known online for years and spent time with several times over the years. He had learned Russian fairly fluently as well. Her actually gaining citizenship required a number of interviews over something like 2 to 3 years to establish legitimacy and so on. During the very last interview, where she would have finally been rubber stamped in, she admitted to cheating on him. During the interview, deal over. He withdrew support from her and told her to take a hike. Last he heard, she had fled the state before immigration could deport her and now was just another illegal immigrant in the U.S. Strange thing was she had a young kid, not his, that would have definitely been born during the time they were supposedly involved long distance. Sounds like he should have seen this coming. He was definitely heartbroken about the kid though, treated him like his own anyway. All she had to do was shut up for just 1 more hour, let the paperwork get finished, then
ditch him and she'd have gotten off completely free and legal. Man, why would she do that? Like, the land of milk and honey is right there before you, Russian lady, and you just threw it all away by admitting it. I mean, maybe on some level the guilt was there. I don't know. I'm curious why she gave up the ghost.
I used to work retail with a Filipino woman who was a mail-order bride. She was a tiny little thing around 35 years old, and her husband was a very large, stocky white man around 50 to 55. I thought it was very weird when she first told me, but when I met him and saw them together, it actually seemed like a nice fit. He was always coming into the store to bring her lunch or to buy her things and pick her up from work on his motor scooter. It was pretty cute watching them ride it together. It seemed like he really enjoyed spoiling her, and when she talked about him, she seemed very much in love with him. It didn't appear that he was particularly wealthy or anything, but he treated her very well and they seemed very happy. Just before I left that shop, she had just became pregnant with their first child.
I guess it's one of those things. Who would I be to judge someone for how they meet the woman that they love if they're genuinely happy together? I mean, I think one of the most popular ways to meet women nowadays is Tinder, which is kind of depressing, but I guess that's the way things are with people being less and less sociable nowadays.
I have been married to what some might call a mail-order bride for almost a year now, but first let me correct a few common misconceptions about how it works now, in the USA at least. First, you can no longer just get a catalog and pick a woman out of it and pay to have her sent to you. 20 plus years ago, maybe, but not anymore. In order for her to get a K-1 fiancé visa, you must have met her in person at least once and provided substantial evidence of a meaningful relationship, such as pictures with both of you, email, phone, chat logs, or other documents such as travel records showing you were both in the same place at the same time. You can apply for an exception to this on cultural grounds if both you and her are part of cultures that regularly practice arranged marriages. Second, she still has to go through all of the procedures involved in getting a permanent immigration visa. That means background checks, medical checks, which can usually only be performed at a very short list of places who naturally charge a lot. Tons of documents from both parties and an interview in person at her country's U.S. embassy, or sometimes at a consulate, which might be a really long way for her to go if she doesn't live in her country's capital city. Third, if you meet her through a service legally known as an international marriage broker, or IMB, designed specifically to match Americans with foreigners looking to marry and immigrate, you have to get a background check done on yourself, and that information is then given to her as soon as you start talking. This information includes things such as your criminal record, especially any history of domestic violence, your marital and family history, number of previous wives, divorcees, number of children, and personal information, age, full name, legal name, etc. All that said, I went on a tour of Thailand as a combination vacation and to meet some of the women on one of these sites. I was 34 at the time, and the next youngest man who was there at the same time as me was 48, and I'm pretty sure all of them, 8 others, had been married before at least once. As for the women, some just seemed like they wanted money or free food and drinks. Others seemed like they just found foreigners more attractive but had no interest in leaving their country, and very, very few seemed like they might be honestly interested in me and in moving to America eventually. Most of them I couldn't even have a conversation with since they didn't speak enough English. I consider myself lucky to have found the woman who I ended up marrying, since she was both one of the honest ones and she had a university degree in English. I kept in touch with her daily over internet chat and video chat, and I flew back to see her 3 additional times before the 5th and final time when I flew over there with my family and she flew back with us. We had a traditional Thai engagement ceremony while my family was there, and we had a small courthouse wedding a month after we got back to America. Our first anniversary is next month, and right now she's going to an American community college to try for an associate's degree here while cooking me delicious Thai food all the time. So I'd say it's going great so far. We've had a few arguments and fights, like I assume most newlywed married couples do, especially ones that didn't live together before marriage. But I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.
See, that's the interesting part about reading all these Reddit stories and everything. It's interesting to learn about these processes. Like, obviously, this has its upsides, its downsides, and whatnot. I guess good for the guy. He's celebrating his first wedding anniversary. Like I said, I'm just a bit mixed on, the whole, morality of mail-order brides, I guess. But
quite a few of these seem to have worked out quite well. My sister's father has a mail-order bride from China. She was a divorcee with a 17-year-old son. I only got to meet her once, but she was really nice and cooked the most amazing food. Last year, my sister's dad finally started taking Chinese language classes as a surprise and found out that her cute nickname for him was Fat American. Don't even ask me the logic of why I pick the voices I do for these stories, because there's no logic to it. I just come out with one and then I dedicate myself to it. It's pretty much just for the sake of variation. My uncle is married to a wonderful Filipino mail-order bride. He's a socially awkward aspie. She's warm, gregarious, and funny. They've been together probably 18 years and have a great, well-adjusted kid. As a teen, I thought it was such a weird relationship. I imagined for her that it was very shallow and lacking in fulfillment. Now I can see that they both get a better life. Her financial situation improved as well as that of her family back home. She has a beautiful child and she married into a pretty nice family. For my uncle's part, he has a wife and daughter who care about him and help him navigate the world. I adore her, mostly because she was good to my grandmother, Uncle's mom, and she visited her all the time, called her mom, made sure her daughter, she's my cousin even though she's younger than my own kids, had a solid relationship with grandma. All in all, I think my uncle seriously lucked out meeting such a great bride. To be perfectly frank, there have been too many positive ones that I'm not even thinking about the main topic right now. I'm honing in on they were my cousin even though they're younger than my own kids. So does anyone remember Johnny Capahara? And it was 2 movies about a Hawaiian guy who moves to Aspen or something. It's somewhere with snow and all that, and he learns to snowboard rather than surf. But then in the sequel film, he goes back to Hawaii, I think, and he meets up with his grandfather who has had an illegitimate child with someone. So that makes this young boy Johnny Capahara's uncle, and he holds it over and I'm your uncle, you should listen to me, even though he's 10 years old and Johnny is 17 or some crap. I don't know. That's all I'm thinking about right now.
I used to play Magic at a game store where the owner often went to Thailand to star in shemale smut. He was very open about it and would tell you about it and show you the DVDs if you asked. Anyway, on one of his trips, he decided to bring home a bride. She was a very nice younger woman. They lived in his store. He converted the back room of his comic store into a studio apartment, and she basically stayed in that back room all the time. He would occasionally yell at her to make him food, and that was generally the only time we would see her. She stayed with him just long enough to get citizenship and then bailed on him.
Ungrateful.
No, that's good for her, to be honest. This guy sounds like a pig. What I'm more curious about is if he had a penchant for, the best of both worlds, I guess you could put it. Well, what was she packing? My neighbor growing up had a mail-order bride from either Russia or Ukraine. They had a son, and he was a butthole. We had a bonfire one night, and he decided to surprise me and everyone else around by throwing batteries into the fire. Messed everything up. Came home from a half day at school one day to see cop cars in front of the house. Turns out that the father was beating the wife and graping minus the G the son. That's why he was always kind of messed up. I was waiting for a messed up one like that. Am I happy that I found it? Not particularly. Hope that guy's rotting in jail.
Okay, this gets a little crazy. Everybody knew my neighbor was gay. It was a fact and never questioned. Let's call him Terry. Terry was about 45 and lived alone in his inherited mother's house. That was 4 doors down from us. He kept himself to himself and seemed pleasant. One day, we were surprised to see a Taiwanese woman about half his age had moved in. Let's call her June. June didn't speak much English and loved gardening. Over the next few months, our neighbor's house was slowly transformed into a mini botanical garden with a small fountain, new fences, and the start of a new driveway. One day, out of the blue, I heard a loud bang at my mother's front door. I was about 17 at the time, visiting from college. I opened the door to find June stood on the pavement throwing poo at my mother's windows. Yes, actual poo. I shouted at her, "What are you doing, madam?" To which she ignored me and stormed back to her house. Now, this was back in early 2003, so after telling my mother what had happened, we took the good old British route of cleaning it up and not causing trouble. The pool was hard and not an issue to remove from the window frames, front lawn, and fence. We thought that was it and laughed it off. Big mistake. The next time I visited my mother, I noticed that there was more poo on my mother's front lawn and the lawn of our elderly next-door neighbor. Confused but incensed, I stormed round to Terry's house with my bag still in hand and banged loudly on the front door. Terry answered with a surprised look on his face, shaking. I shouted at him, "Tell your wife to stop throwing poo at my mother mother's house, you weirdo!" and marched back home. A few days passed and my mum was pleased to report no issue. My outburst had worked. The next-door neighbors sent me a box of chocolates as a thank you, and we celebrated with a barbecue. It was during that barbecue that the neighbor mentioned her cat had gone missing. My mother also had cats, who often roamed for a few days but always came home for dinner. We assured her he would be back and not to worry. A few days passed and we realized one of my mother's cats was also absent. Then 2 and 3, along with the neighbors. It suddenly dawned on all of us that the poo June was throwing at the house was cat poo from her garden. We have put up flyers, etc., but haven't seen the cats since. Meanwhile, Terry and June's new driveway looks lovely.
Okay, all circumstantial evidence points to her absolutely abducting or killing those cats, but, I mean, you can't just, make accusations like that. But I have to say, if my dog went missing or something, I have a dog, and, I had an inkling that the new neighbor 4 doors down or something took it, well, I would cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war.
I know several guys who had mail-order brides. All were military or ex-military. That's why so many mail-order brides were from places where there were U.S. bases, like the Philippines. One guy, ex-Navy, brought over a Filipino wife. He seemed to love her, but she did not adapt well. She would never answer the phone if he was not home, even though he explained it was him calling her. She wouldn't drive his car and a bunch of other things like that. She seemed nice, but was lonely, so he brought over her sister, and things really changed. We used to travel for weeks for work, and one time when we got back, the wife and sister were gone. Killed him, and he never saw it coming. That was years ago, and I never heard what happened.
Absolutely not surprised. But, okay, so I've actually been saving this, so here's the thing. I also know a guy, not technically a mail-order bride, but he did have a wife that he brought over from Thailand. And he's actually done this a few times. I think he's gone through 3 different women. And he's a nice guy. He's actually just had some unfortunate luck, or I believe one left him. One died, sadly, and currently he's very happy with another woman. Anyway, I'm in my late teens, and I'm going to work with him because the guy I usually worked with wasn't available. So he picks me up from my house, and I'm like, "Hey, why do you have this little Buddha statue on your dashboard? Are you Buddhist?" He's like, "Oh no, my wife, she's Taiwanese and she is Buddhist." And I look at him and I say, "Oh, so does she not believe in physical or worldly possessions or anything like that? Is she very spiritual and stuff?" And he stops for a minute and looks off while he's staring down the road as he's driving and everything. He turns to me for a quick second and goes, "Yeah, she's not Buddhist." He knows this because she is a really hard gambler and apparently quite the money grubber, but that was long ago. And again, I'll say this, no foul play in his life or relationships or anything. He's very happy now, which I am glad he is because he's a nice guy.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.